It's 8 o'clock in the west, 9:30 in the centre, and 10 o'clock here on the east coast. Good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to day 2 of the Future Drought Fund Science to Practice Forum. I'm Andrew Bell. I'm your host through this second day here from our central studio here in Canberra. We're going to be going far and wide, but we'll begin first by crossing just to my left here. And it's lovely to have someone actually with me in person. This is Kerryn Crosthwaite, who is the FAS, the First Assistant Secretary at the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. And Kerryn is not only going to talk to us about this event, but first, acknowledge country. Good morning to you, Kerryn, and off you go.
Thank you, Andy. Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Science to Practice Forum, Day 2. I'm going to start with an acknowledgement, and I will do it in Ngunnawal language as I'm here in Canberra on Ngunnawal country. Dara Nuna, Dara Nunawal. Yungu Nullamunyan Dunamunyan. Nunawawari, Darawari, Dindi, Wan Garalijinyin. This is Ngunnawal country. Today we are meeting together on Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the elders. And I'd like to extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands that all of our participants are standing on today around Australia. We're talking about building drought resilience and caring for country, and it's my hope that our work together today is going to result in First Nations expertise and knowledge being reflected in more resilient country all around Australia. So thank you and welcome. So whether you're dialing in from home or from one of our hub viewing locations, I'm really thrilled you're able to join us today. The forum's designed to bring together a wide range of voices to build the foundations of drought resilience in our regions. The event is for everyone, but especially participants who are from the 8 drought resilience and innovation hubs and from people who'd like to hear from them. Yesterday set the vision for the hubs to inspire resilience and innovation. Learned about the objectives of the Future Drought Fund. We met the tropical North Queensland, Southern Queensland and Northern New South Wales and Southern New South Wales hubs. And we also discussed how the hubs can engage their communities for transformative outcomes. And today we're going to meet some more hubs. We'll meet Tasmania first up, Southwest Western Australia, that's my local hub, and Northern Western Australia and Northern Territory hubs. A big theme of today is working with and for country. Caring for country and finding ways to embed First Nations knowledge into our understanding of land management and drought resilience is something really practical that we can contribute to reconciliation. And it's also going to generate better outcomes. Today, we'll investigate how the hubs can embed Indigenous knowledge into their drought resilience activities. And we're going to hear from experts about how to bridge the gap between researchers and end users through sharing their success stories. Today's keynote is a Q&A with Liz Peterson, Bruce Pascoe and Kate Andrews on designing a drought-resilient future. Liz has more than 20 years of experience in agricultural and environmental economics. Bruce is a farmer and is the author of Dark Emu. And Kate is the Executive Officer of NRM Regions Australia. It promises to be a lively discussion about what a drought-resilient future looks like for our regions. And I encourage you to think about what drought resilience questions you might want answered by the panel and engage in that through the Hop-In app. Another important forum theme is hearing from you. We want you to get involved. You can have your say throughout the day in the Hop-In chat. I was in that chat yesterday. It was very active. The Hop-In Q&A feature also allows you to get your questions answered. And yesterday, those who were involved were invited to contribute to the Research and Adoption Investment Plan. That plan will help identify our highest national drought resilience investment priorities. We're collecting your feedback on the investment plan via the Hop-In chat. So I encourage you to post your ideas into that chat even today as they come to you. You can use the hashtag investment plan so that we don't miss your feedback and can send that through to Alluvium. So thank you again for your commitment to building a more drought resilient future. And I think it's time for us to go to the Tasmanian hub.
It will be in a moment. Thank you, Kerryn, and thanks for coming. Lovely to see you. So it was a most active, enjoyable, geographically diverse day yesterday. We are in times we've never known, and that means that we have the hubs represented all around the country, but we've got many more locations where people are speaking to us from. The plan, of course, was for us to have audiences in all those centres, from Darwin up in the top end, all the way down the East Coast, across the Nullarbor, over to Merredin in the wheat belt. But of course, COVID-19 intervened. There have been some splendid rearrangements. We've been extremely resilient and nimble and flexible, and you have been most forgiving of any little technical glitches, of which there weren't very many, but there's bound to be at least a glitch or two along the way. Imagine doing this 50 years ago. 50 years ago, it was a wonder of the world to see live cricket from the Wacker on the East Coast. So doing this now today is incredible. How do we do it? Hop in, which I know is, for many people, an unfamiliar platform. There are instructions. Our main one is use Google Chrome. If you're watching in an audience and you need to log in particularly, use Google Chrome. We love that. Wear headphones. And we know some people yesterday, their screens were going fuzzy. That's a technical term. Also freezing up. Just refresh your screen and it usually comes good. But the chat is there, where the comments section. And if you are having any problems, we'll try and address them there or via me. As Kerryn said, there's going to be this panel, this blockbuster panel after lunch. We've got a big morning session ahead of us, so I'm not going to dilly and or dally on my way. So let's go to Tasmania. And Tasmanian Hub is about to report to us. But before we go live to Hobart, let's take a little look at what that Tasmanian Hub has been up to.
Across the country, we have different microclimates and different regions for growing. So in Tasmania, for those people that think that we're green everywhere, that's not the case. Certain parts in Tasmania have experienced extreme drought, up the East Coast in particular, and some of those pockets. And we also have things like a green drought as well, where we might have pasture there, but we're not getting the good enough growth for the agricultural activity that's occurring in that area. It's a challenging time for anyone when they're in situations such as drought. They've got different business decisions that they have to make, and these could be short and long-term decisions. Currently at the moment, farmers can feel in isolation depending on where they are, and might find it hard to find solutions to where they currently are.
So the effects of drought cover the whole triple bottom line, and then you have a knock-on effect that happens post-drought. So even, looking at lambing rates for the next year will be reduced, and there's a kind of knock-on effect with pasture and condition and general productivity from the farm. So there is just a sort of a series of issues that happen.
Drought for us here in the Cull River Valley is a very topical thing. Being a grower in the region for that period of time, we've experienced the highs and lows, and of course drought is obviously one of those low periods. For us to be able to produce a good quality product consistently, it is important that we do have stable conditions.
So we do have farming extremes, and I think that's why this hub will be important to work across all of the different areas and get a bit of a litmus for what needs to happen in the different regions, because you need it to come from the locals up so that you can understand the challenges and issues.
So if we're looking at the bigger, broader end goal, it's about the health, well-being and nutrition of our communities. So if our farmers are resilient, if our farmers have the tools there to enable them to continue to produce during tough times with the environment in mind, then that makes sure that our communities are sustained for the long term.
Preparation for drought is about having key dates and points, so knowing what the weather will be, where there's a key priority about when to destock, what processes for drought lotting for financial returns, and where that needs to be put in place.
the better we band together, we have better power and better focus into our markets, our separate markets. You know, I can see that impacting Tasmania, being more specific with the industries and where they're best grown, and the resources that can help support those businesses.
One of the things that we get passionate about is working with people to share their knowledge. I think that that's something that's undervalued, is how much knowledge is already in the community out there. There's people who are constantly playing around and innovating and coming up with really interesting practical solutions to problems. So it's really great to get groups of people together to kick the dirt and talk about, you know, what they're doing and what they're making work, what's hard, what's working, what's not. And therein lies like a gold resource for you know, drought resilience and preparedness.
We have a lot of good emerging young farmers coming through, and we've got a lot of people that are actually moving to Tasmania wanting to experience what we have to offer here. Now, whether that's people coming into farming for the first time, startups, people looking to expanding their business offering. So this project needs to be able to cater for a wide range of farmers. It's an exciting time for Tasmanian agriculture. So this research and this program is all based around need and future focus. And it's critical that we have this type of program available so that it's targeting exactly what each grower or region is looking to achieve, and then starting to develop that capability so that they are able to be resilient when the time comes.
What's working, what's not, I might add, what could. That's one of the reasons we're here. That was giving us an overview of Tasmania. Now let's go live, cross over Bass Strait and go to Kathy in the Tasmanian Hub in Hobart. Good morning to you.
Hello, Andrew, and good morning, everyone, and hello from Tasmania. I'm Kathy Evans, and I am delighted that we are being given the mandate to co-design this work. Since doing my Ag Science degree at the University of Melbourne many years ago, I've witnessed and indeed been guilty of top-down approaches that we know fail to solve complex problems such as drought and climate change. I'm determined to help our teams, our partners and our networks make this work because it deeply serves my own frustrated want that we take a whole-of-system perspective. Well, the core operations of the Hub are housed within the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture, which is a joint venture between the University of Tasmania and the Tasmanian Government. Our institute has a mandate to integrate industry development and extension with our research and educational offerings. Today I'll be sharing the podium with Rob Anders, Beck Harris and Deepa Kumar, also from the university. But this hub is not about the university. Our partners represent farmers, land managers, water managers, rural business professionals, entrepreneurs, NRM practitioners and various industry and community developers. They operate in Tasmania and or nationally and internationally. Indeed, we are very grateful to all for coming on board, and it's great to see some of you in the room today. I'll now hand over to Rob Anders, who will guide us on a set of principles that we will continually return to as we do our work together. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Kathy. Ya Blingna. I'm Rob Anders, a Tasmanian Aboriginal man. Tasmanian Aboriginal people are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands and waters of our island home. I pay my respect to them and other Indigenous and Aboriginal people and First Peoples of this country. Our people suffered through colonisation and dispossession as the landed gentry admired the park-like features areas for their stock that our old people created with country. Our men, our women and our children were brutally violated in unimaginable ways that have not been fully recognised. Our people were banished from land stolen from us, our people were hunted, and our people were forced to work in an aiding system for token reward, much like elsewhere around this country. Our hub aspires to the 5 pillars of NESP's Indigenous engagement and participation strategy. They are trust, building trust between non-Indigenous and Indigenous peoples, respect, that there is mutual respect, rights, upholding the rights of First Nations peoples as defined under the UN's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, understanding that there are mutual understandings, and finally, partnerships. Partnerships are developed that are enduring. Drought resistance has shaped country for millennia, and it's not just about adding water. Irreparable damage has been caused to country from past 230 years of modern day farming practices that is plain for even the blind to see. In taking our lands, you have taken responsibility to care for our country. This responsibility does not end at the farm gate or the bottom paddock, but encompasses everything between the highest mountains and the deepest seas. Everything is connected. Nor is this responsibility for tomorrow's generation, but is for generations to come. Collectively, our hubs should be working towards the federal government's policy of closing the gap in partnership to redress Aboriginal disadvantage on one of the world's oldest living cultures. We are Tasmania's first and oldest farmers. Our old people carefully and sustainably manage these areas for thousands of generations. And you.
Thank you, Rob. I'm sure it won't be lost on some that I'm about to use the language of the landed gentry. Water is a major asset in Tasmania. It's helping to grow farm gate value, spurred in part by new irrigation schemes. In an agricultural context, we don't always have water at the right place in the right time. What's different from the rest of Australia is the nature of the water cycle and how that influences the multiple and competing demands for water. These range from the hydroelectricity scheme through to environmental flows and natural values that are the very reason tourists and new settlers continue to arrive here. Deepa will now talk about the highs and lows of irrigation expansion before Beck expands on our climate futures.
Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. The Google Earth image that you see on the left of your screens is not something people usually associate with Tasmania. We have a reputation of having plentiful water resources. In fact, even here we say we have 12% of the runoff of the nation's water resources in less than 1% of the land area. Such average values obscure variation in water availability regionally. And this perception of plenty has influenced water resource management in the state. Hydropower has been the focus of state investment for very long. Only recently, only since 2010, has there been much state investment in irrigation schemes in the state. And the map on the right of your screen shows all the current active schemes that have been developed since 2010. Now, a lot of this development is driven by this Agri-Vision 2050, which is a target to increase farm gate value from to $10 billion by 2050. And the graph shows the increase in water use, water availability and use in these new schemes. Now, this growth in value is undoubtedly a good economic outcome for the state. And many farmers on the back of this development have made a lot of investment on their properties, putting in new infrastructure and taking out a lot of debt to do that. Some do it to increase and grow new higher value crops. Others intensify dairy and beef production, backed by good prices currently available. Some others do it for insurance or survival. So there are different motivations for investing in irrigation. While the economic outcomes may be desirable for the state, it comes with a lot of new vulnerabilities. How resilient will we be if these high levels of debt cannot be serviced during the next drought? The landscape level environmental impacts of irrigation are often slow, they're cumulative, and they take a long time to manifest. What does that mean for the long-term sustainability of irrigation and the social license that we have for irrigation? These are questions and concerns that we care about quite deeply here. With that, I hand over to Beck.
Thanks, Deepa. So to build drought resilience, we need to understand the natural variability in rainfall in particular, and also the trends in climate that we're already starting to see due to climate change. In the last few decades, since about 1960, Tasmania has experienced an increase in mean temperature of about 0.8 degrees Celsius. And as we go forward, by 2050, if our emissions continue along the path that we're currently on, we're likely to see a further warming of about 1 more degrees Celsius. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but it's been enough to cause an increase in the frequency, intensity and duration of heat waves, which obviously affects demand for water in crops, and substantial changes to rainfall in different seasons and regions. This figure that you can see here shows the change in rainfall that's expected in each decade relative to the current decade, with the bluey-green colour indicating increases in rainfall and the brown colour showing where decreases in rainfall are expected. In the next 2 decades, we can expect quite large reductions in autumn rainfall, which is shown at the top of the diagram, of up to 50% less rain for some areas. In later decades, Western Tasmania may see an increase in rainfall, which is reflecting the fact that rainfall is naturally variable at the decadal timescale. Summer rainfall, which you can see in the bottom row there, also shows ups and downs in each decade, while spring shows a more consistent decline in rainfall for most of Tasmania, of 10 to 20% in some areas and up to 25% by 2050 in the central north. There are a couple of exceptions, with small areas in the northeast and east coast showing increased spring rainfall in the next 2 decades, but by the 2050s, all regions show decreased spring rainfall. Winter rainfall, on the other hand, is showing the opposite trend, with substantial increases in rainfall over the next 20 to 30 years. There are many different ways that we can look at drought. Unfortunately, at the moment, we haven't had a chance to update the recent climate models to calculate some of those different indices of drought. But based on early work by the Climate Futures for Tasmania project and also our understanding of the climate system, we know that we can expect increases, more frequent high-intensity rainfall events interspersed by drier periods and an increased frequency of drought on the east coast of Tasmania in the future. So as temperature continues to rise, evaporation is also going to increase, so that even in areas where rainfall might increase, conditions will be drier on the ground, shown here in the figure with the aridity index, which incorporates evaporation and rainfall. And so as you can see, in each future decade, aridity increases in almost all of the agricultural areas of Tasmania. So as climate change continues, we can expect substantial changes in Tasmania's climate that will affect producers. We'll still see that natural variability in rainfall, but this is going to occur on top of that drying trend that are due to climate change. I'll pass on back to Kathy.
Thanks, Beck. Well, given our climate futures, it's clear different areas will be impacted in different ways. So the rest of this presentation is about our hub. We're covering the diversity of agriculture in Tasmania in terms of the mix of farming enterprises. It's not uncommon, for example, for a single Tasmanian business to deliver to commodity, niche and boutique markets. One of our current Nuffield scholars, for example, runs sheep across 5,000 hectares while also maintaining a 20-hectare vineyard. We're also experiencing a large expansion in protected cropping, especially berries. Well, because drought operates on the system, we will address issues across the landscape as well as those operating at enterprise level. This is the first pass of our desired outcomes because one of the first activities will be strategic foresighting with our partners. If you look at the right-hand box first, then it's important to say that regardless of what we do, enterprises will continue to adopt and to innovate. Our role is to accelerate and augment this process. And when we say connectedness, it's not simply making connections, rather it's the way in which people are brought and things are brought together. The middle box in this diagram is about our landscape scale approach. In Tasmania, we have a great opportunity to support land use decisions as much as decisions about any given management practice in time and space. Looking now at the left-hand box, we are already seeing farmers in Tasmania innovate in terms of their business models, and this includes new forms of cooperation. So our hub will be alert to opportunities and proactively add value where it makes sense to do so. This figure illustrates the adaptive cycle we plan to adopt at every level in this hub, from regional strategy right through to on-ground action. It starts with imagining our preferred futures, structuring the complex problem, and then articulating existing knowledge in relation to the opportunity. We then co-construct opportunities, spend time to negotiate conflicting areas, and pursue agile co-development of solutions. The need for extension and research is revealed through the process, with adoption being a series of learning activities to reduce uncertainty and to support decision-making. Monitoring, evaluation and learning, also at multiple levels, helps us to identify new opportunities and new means to enable the next adaptive cycle. It goes without saying that the hub can't be all things to all people, and we will need to prioritise the activities and the projects that we support. We envisage a hub with action on the ground at the very core of the ecosystem. The first step is to understand what's working or not working for existing formal and informal groups. Critical to success are the facilitators and how the group keeps themselves accountable to implementation plans. An ideal scenario is when research and action occur concurrently. This might include helping people gain more value from their own experiments. Indeed, there is currently a renaissance in data-driven, farmer-centric on-farm experimentation. But no group is an island. They need to draw in specific services or expertise at key points in decision-making. Group learning can also benefit from connections to other groups. But someone needs to act as the connector, which often currently defaults to the overworked group facilitator. What if the connector was attached to an adoption and innovation hub that helped the group to achieve better outcomes? The connector could also link the facilitators to training opportunities. Last year, our institute piloted a program called Extension Accelerator, targeted to early career graduates who suddenly found themselves in the workplace and having to talk to real farmers. Facilitation is not the only skill required in these settings. We will also establish an innovation connection shop, which is the place where people can go when they have a question to ask or a problem to solve. This might include taking an idea from concept to commercialisation. We will help people to step onto their unique innovation pathway without replicating the services of others. If, as part of the process, there is a clear gap in knowledge, then the hub can connect the group to the research community. Indeed, our university is providing a floating skill base from multiple disciplines to help develop up proposals and leverage resources. So this is our playground. The hub will work to link multiple action groups, to share knowledge and to help reveal common needs across the network. The partners and their networks also help to bring issues to the table through the hub's region-level processes. Pictured here are our presenters today, as well as Caroline Mohammed, our Deputy Director, and Brian Field, who is our interim knowledge broker. We will operate through a series of interconnected teams and work packages to build the soft infrastructure and knowledge-sharing platforms needed for this work. We conclude this presentation by noting our solid foundations and optimistic outlook. While the image on the left conveys the profit narrative, the one on the right reminds us of those who also value regenerated landscapes. How we prepare for drought will be shaped by a diversity of views, values, attitudes and aspirations. Broader understanding and respect for the rights of traditional custodians is something we aspire to. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Kathy in Hobart. It's Q&A time. If you have a question, go into the Q&A box, write it up, and we'll endeavour to get it answered from our colleagues in Hobart. If I can follow through to that idea of how you get things to happen, the sort of ripple effect, and to ensure that you don't get one or two people carrying too much of the load and carrying it into those circles that were going further and further away. How can you have a system where you can ensure that you don't fall for the trick that bedevils so many community organisations, where it falls on a handful of people to carry the load? Because ultimately the work you're doing in the hubs is going to benefit the many rather than the few. I don't know if you can speak to that, Kathy?
Yeah, sure, Andrew. Look, I always think a problem shared is a problem halved. And which is one reason when we bring all our partners together that, you know, what they bring to this hub is their diverse networks. And that's how we work, so that, you know, we don't get these single point dependencies. It's about governance. It's about having good process. So it's clear. It also starts with a good set of principles by which we operate. You know, and Rob indicated some of those in his slide earlier. I think I'll leave it at that.
Another point, we heard about the perception of plenty. Is talking about drought in Tasmania quite a difficult conversation to start in the broader community, because people say, we've got plenty of rain here? Is it as fundamental as that? To get people's head in the game? Yeah, look, thanks, Andrew. I think you're talking about the typical urban-rural divide here. I think when we get out on the ground, especially, for example, in the east coast of Tasmania, drought is very real. It's episodic in Tasmania. But again, if you speak to one of our partners like Rural Business Tasmania, it's very real when farmers are in the depth of drought, and it's no different to anywhere else. Some of the ways that when it really starts impacting people, when we get an influx of tourists, and again, I might refer to our east coast, we've got this beautiful coastal area that people flock to. But in the recent drought, the rivers supplying those towns have actually run dry. So you can imagine the towns themselves don't... even the townspeople don't have the water supply. So imagine it impacts on tourism, which is also a major earner for the state as well. We've got a question that's just come in from Mohammed Shahzad Hussain, who's asking a fundamental question. What is the reason for increasing temperatures in Tasmania? Why has that happened in the way it has happened? I don't know who can speak to that in Hobart. Handing over to Beck.
Well, the increases in temperatures that we've been seeing are a direct influence of increased carbon dioxide due to human activity over the last 150 years or so, since the Industrial Revolution. So the increases in temperature are very much following the same trend that we're seeing around the world and around Australia, although the temperatures increases in Tasmania are slightly lower than the global average, which is mainly just because we're an island state. So the ocean absorbs a little bit more of that heat. So those increases are slightly lower than the global average.
Is also the fact that you're a lack of heavy industries. I know you've got. I definitely know you've got the chocolate factory, but you've got things like the aluminium smelter and stuff like that. But you're an overarching agricultural state rather than industrial, with traditional industrial economy.
I'm not sure that I'm understanding the question, but
but part of the reason is that you're not as intense. You haven't been historically as intense as an industrial state as others on the mainland.
Sure, but that's true. So the increases in temperature that we're experiencing are very much a response to the global changes to the climate system. So it's not, increases in temperature are not a regional phenomenon. It's something that's happening around.
And finally, from this end, before we wrap it up, do you think having a clearly identifiable place, the islands, plural, of Tasmania, actually helps you work together rather than regions which can be somewhat a line on a map drawn for administrative reasons?
Absolutely. We often talk about ourselves as being a living laboratory, and the fact that, and I don't want to do the old Tasmanian joke that there's only one sort of degree of separation, but it is of great benefit here. We're very close to our policymakers. You can also lob into their office and have a conversation. So, we have that connectedness in Tasmania. It can also spark, that can also be a lot of tensions as well. And, we talk about the diversity of views that range from the green to the brown, if you know what I mean. Because we have this, this beautiful, amazing environment down here, and these different needs for using land, for agriculture, for the hydro, and so on and so forth. But yes, we are well connected, and that is a bonus here. Also, you might be interested to look at Brand Tasmania at the moment has a beautiful campaign called Be Tasmanian, and it really articulates what is possible down here, that people here are able to do things despite, we often talk about punching above our weight down here, and it's very true. We tend to be able to get things done despite some apparent disadvantages. So we're very optimistic about being able to make this hub work.
Kathy, thank you so much, and to your colleagues in Hobart, the fourth of our 8 hubs to report to this FDF Science to Practice Forum. Have a great day and keep up the work. Thank you so much. Well, we're now going to travel right across the country, because we're going from Tasmania to our next hub, which is in southwest WA, and the hub is based in Merredin. And there's Tanya in Merredin, and she's going to be joined by Graham, who, just as the West Coast Eagles and the Fremantle Dockers have been affected by certain restrictions because of COVID, they flew to Victoria. Graham, I believe, was already there, but it's now time to hear about the work of the Southwest WA Hub and how they see the future. So it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. As you've alluded to, in fact, we're doing a true transnational presentation today because, thanks to COVID, I'm actually in the Gippsland region of Victoria, about 3 hours east of Melbourne. And Tanya Minster, who is also part of our team, she and many of the team are at our Drylands, our Merredin Drylands Research Institute, which is about 250 kilometres almost due east of Perth. And so between myself and Tanya, we're going to give you an update on what we're doing. Tanya is very, as I am, we actually work for GGA. So GGA is the Grower Group Alliance, and the hub is part of the Grower Group Alliance. You'll find out more about the Grower Group Alliance, or GGA, as we go through this presentation. And in fact, there'll be an exam question at the end of this on who is GGA, because it's a very important part of what the hub is all about. And so over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to give you a bit of a snapshot on Western Australia's agriculture. For many of you, WA is a long way away, and so like every state in Australia, we have our unique challenges, and we also have our strengths. So between Tanya and I, we'll talk to you a bit about that. Then Tanya, who is also a practicing wheat and sheep farmer in her own right, will talk to you about what's going on in Western Australia, including illustrating some of the land use patterns. I'll then come back and talk to you a bit about the hub that we have in Western Australia, and then we'll summarise that in the last minute or two. So that's the basic plan over the next 20 minutes. Like every state, and I think we tend to lose sight of this at times, we are all good at things, and in fact it's springboarding over our strengths, or springboarding from our strengths that we sometimes don't perhaps think enough about. So in the case of Western Australia, we do have a world-class agricultural sector, and when you consider that 80% of Western Australia's population lives in or near Perth, we have a very, we have low density populations through, in essence, about almost a third of mainland Australia's landmass. So agriculture has a huge role to play in helping to underpin regional communities. As you'll see in a moment, agriculture in Western Australia is also a major exporter in its own right. It's underpinned by a highly educated workforce with extremely good academic institutions. There are 5 universities in Western Australia, and unlike many on the eastern seaboard, the universities tend to be focused around Perth. The reality is we don't have the population or the spare population to support a lot of regional hubs like many of our counterparts along the eastern seaboard in particular can do. And also, Western Australia has actually a really long and proud history of entrepreneurship, both in agriculture, but for many people, probably the headline industry has been mining over a long period of time. The other thing about the West is we have very old soils, and so that absolutely helps to define how we farm, and a lot of those soils are very poor. But notwithstanding all those things, as you'll see from this slide, this is a snapshot on, in essence, Western Australia's agriculture. The reality is that we export about 80% of what we produce, and wheat is our major export crop. It goes throughout Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and in fact, Indonesia has traditionally been our major export market. As you'll see, as you may have seen on the slide, we also export a lot of wool. And in fact, and Tanya will talk more about this, but in essence, a lot of Western Australia is really a mixed farming environment. And so wheat and wool absolutely work hand in glove with each other. But as you'll see from this slide, like all of us, we have a range of challenges. There's no doubt that we're facing hotter, drier climates, and that in itself is making it harder to farm profitably. If you take the southwest area of Western Australia, particularly since about the year 2000, winter rainfall has reduced by, on average, about 28%, which is more than any other part of the country. The southeast, for example, of Australia, where I am at the moment, has tended to average about a 15% reduction in rainfall. And in fact, if you look at this slide, the map of Australia on the left really gives average rainfall zones for all of the last century, and it compares it for the first 16 years of this century. Without going into detail, the takeout message really is that Central Australia is spreading south. So we're all facing hotter, drier, and changing climates, both with regards to variability and volatility. So that's something that we're all having to contend with. But that leads to a range of challenges, but also within that context, as if you think about the previous slide on our export markets, we're coming under, as always, we're under pressure when it comes to our export markets. As I mentioned a moment ago, Indonesia is Western Australia's largest export market, but over the last few years, we've actually lost market share to it's commonly called the Black Sea countries. So Russia in particular, which is the world's largest wheat exporter, has actually taken market share from us. The reality is we can't stand on our laurels at all. And as you'll see from this slide, the 3 tonne per hectare sort of water limited potential wheat yield has moved. It's the red line. It's moving west, and And in particular, over the last 20 or 30 years, it's moved it's 36 kilometres west. And so what it's meaning is we're all having to contend with hotter, dry climates. So how will this change our land use? And how are we going to farm when we have significantly less water to be able to access? Because the current trends, the current predictions for the Bureau of Meteorology, for example, are that hotter, dry climates is here to stay. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Tanya, who's going to actually start to drill down a little bit into what's going on the ground in Western Australia. So Tanya, it's over to you.
Thanks, Graham, and thanks everybody. It's really great to be here and being able to represent the Southwest WA Hub out of Hub Central in Merredin. So just as you can see from this map, WA is a huge state, and our Southwest Hub really starts about midway up the state around Carnarvon, and we head down towards east of Esperance. So with that large geography, we've got huge diversity. Through that brown area, we've got our traditional farmland of cropping with our wheat and barley and our canola, as well as our sheep and cattle industries. We've also got a really strong pastoral industry through the southern rangelands and goldfields for sheep and cattle. We've got our intensive industries more in those coastal fringes with our dairy, pork and poultry. And we also have a very strong horticulture and viticulture industries, again, in the Great Southern, southwest through to our famous Margaret River region and through the Swan Valley, and horticulture north of Perth as well. So we've got great diversity, but I think what everyone does know of us in WA and what we're quite parochial about is our absolutely huge cropping industry, and particularly the wheat industry, which underpins our agricultural commodities exported. So we run huge broadacre cropping systems. About 70% of our growers actually still run quite diverse enterprises, including having livestock in the system, and generally that would be merino sheep for their wool and meat. And so we've got about a $6 billion industry from our cropping programs and about $1.5 billion of value from our sheep industries. So we're really, strong economically and very export focused. Our farmers, what is very traditional here in WA, and I think fairly, reasonably could say that this is the same nationally, is that our farmland is both owned and operated by farming family businesses. Sorry, a bit slow on the slide movement. Apologies. Right, sorry about that. So what's going on in our region? So we have a really strong history of research, development and extension here in WA, and that is something that we are very proud of and certainly will be taking forward in the hub. Here where I sit at the Dryland Research Institute, we also have the Merredin Research Station, which is over 100 years old. And so with our friends in the department, we will continue on capitalising on this great infrastructure and great skill set that we have from our research organisations. And so like the Merredin Research Station was done 100 years ago, we have amazing research that has been out there trying to find the knowledge and new technology to implement into our farming systems here in the wheat belt. So we have really strong connections with the department, with CSIRO, with our universities and our RDCs, particularly GRDC, MLA and AWI. And we have a really strong network of grower groups and the individual farmers that are within those grower groups and those that are not. And obviously there is great research across all farming systems and products and value chains. I guess I've got this unique perspective, and Graham alluded to it earlier. I come in with nearly 20 years of experience as a sheep industry development officer and working in farming systems programs. And in the last 15 months, I've been working for the Grower Group Alliance, where we really drive producer-led innovations that come from the ground up. And we have worked very hard in understanding what our grower groups and our individual farmers really have identified as their priority needs. And so we work with that to build up projects that are hitting the priority areas for them. And often, and what we've noticed in the last year or so, but a lot of those projects really are about driving resilience within their businesses. And I guess the other bit of perspective I bring to the conversation and really where I think about the challenges we face here in WA is my own experience as a farmer. I have completely ridden the waves of variability in the last 20 years and have seen for ourselves the 20% decline in winter rainfall and how we as a business have had to adapt to those changes. Adaptation has come in many forms, and most farmers in this state are doing it very well. But they wouldn't be able to do it unless we had the likes of DPIRD, CSIRO, the universities continuing on in the great work that they do. So when we think about the technology advances, I think about plant breeding. We grow greater yields with less moisture now. We've got better disease resistance, better resistance to cold and heat shock to our plants. So we're doing much better in this space. In terms of machinery, there's been 100% adoption of no-till systems here in WA. And so when you think about that conservation of moisture, when we're getting less of it, it's a great thing that we can do more with what we get. We also have auto steer and GPS systems, and a lot of farmers are working towards precision agriculture, where VRT is becoming a greater part of the system. And so what we're seeing in that part of it is that we're conserving our moisture, we're not wasting the inputs that we're putting into our systems, and we're absolutely applying better targeted applications of fertiliser and herbicides. And so we can actually drive or maximise our opportunities. And in terms of management, we've done a lot of work in this space around timeliness and more efficient use of labour units. So as a combination, we've had these huge advances, which has helped with our adaptation. We've also seen a huge improvement in farm financial literacy here in WA, and this has pretty much stemmed from the last decade where we saw some very significant drought seasons, and we had a huge push for drought policy improvements here in WA through our state government. And so we now, over the last decade, have run out a lot of farm business workshops where growers have really taken that opportunity to do their own professional development. And the Grower Group Alliance has also been in that space with driving capacity building with grower groups, which can then be imparted into their farmer members. And land use diversification is becoming an absolute, it's part of, I guess, when people sit down and think about how they're going to be running their businesses into the future, they really need to think about those objective decisions around how we utilise the various land units that we have on our farms. So where we have subsoil constraints like acidity and salinity, we really need to understand, well, what is the best production system for those soil types? And if we're getting less rain, what is the best management across a whole farm? So I can tell you in 2021 that we have made monumental gains in our production systems here in WA, and 10 years ago we weren't doing many of these things. So for instance, last year we received 150 mil of rainfall for the growing season. We sowed 100% of our cropping program dry. So we made these really calculated decisions, understanding our risk, understanding that we've got great and better forecasting, and we understand that utilisation of the moisture at the right time and what we need to do. So I think from a WA perspective, and I'll be very parochial about it, that we are doing really well on the limited rainfall that we do get. But it can't stop, and we have to continue on working very hard. And I guess WA has a lot to protect. In the last 10 years, we're on average growing about 15 million tonnes of grain, which is about worth $6 billion. And this year, we're actually in above rainfall season. Typically, that we're talking about drought hubs and we're receiving great rainfall. But the point is, we've got huge variability, and that volatility is going to be here to stay. So we want to absolutely capture those opportunities in those years where we're getting the rain. But we understand, and I think every farmer in this state knows, that these great seasons will not be the norm, and that we're going to have to ride the waves of variability. So the hub has a huge and important role to play. And I think what this opportunity is for us here in WA is that we want to really accelerate and collaborate these advancements, that we can continue to adapt and work on the really great work that the Grower Group Alliance and our research organisations are doing here in WA and the other stakeholders that will be involved going forward. And I guess from us, you know, we want to continue for that our farmers are being operating profitably and that we have really robust communities that can be resilient to the drought years that will be coming ahead of us. So I'll hand it back over to Graham to talk a bit more about what the Hub is and some of the activities that we'll be doing going forward.
Thank you, Tanya. But what Tanya's done is just given everybody a real-life example of the challenges that Tanya and her family have had to face over the last decade in particular. Like 10 years ago, if you'd said you could actually be profitable on 150 mils of rain, which is not unusual. Yes, it is at the lower end of WA's rainfall within the grain belt, but to be able to farm profitably on about 150 mils of rain is staggering. And so, as said, it's a real life example of the challenges that Tanya's facing and her family is facing today, but also why the initiative that we're collectively talking about today is so important going forward. So over the next 4 or 5 minutes, we'll just talk a little bit about the Grower Group Alliance, which we've already mentioned several times. But really, the Grower Group Alliance, or GGA as we call it, has been operating since 2002. It's a network of 60 grower groups scattered throughout the southwest of Western Australia, and it represents about 4,000 farming enterprises. And the core focus is all about how do you accelerate research and innovation to ensure a more sustainable, profitable future. So the reality is for 18 years, GGA has been running a hub and spoke model where the farmer is at the centre of our universe. And so, in essence, what the hub enables us to do is to accelerate a lot of the things that we've wanted to do, and in some cases turbocharge some of our activities. As Tanya has already said, we will work with a whole range of stakeholders, both within Western Australia and further afield, including universities, the Western Australian WA state government, and of course farmers. On the 19th of May, we actually launched our Southwest Drought Hub in Perth, and we had 65 consortium and stakeholder representatives in the room, and of course, technology being what it is today, we also were able to have 25 people online. And so that was really the first strong publicity that we began to feed into our environment around what the hub is and what it can do. Tanya's already touched on, as I have, a range of our stakeholders, so we're not going to go through the list one by one, but it is extensive. It includes a really important cross-section of important organisations in Western Australia. And so whether it be universities, whether it be grower groups, whether it be CSIRO, whether it be regional development organisations, all these things are important because I think one of the things that we don't often do well in Australia is collaborate. And so it's the power of working together, it's the power of collaboration that is going to enable all of us, both individually and collectively, to meet the challenges going ahead. Some of the principles that we're actually out testing and refining with a number of our stakeholders at the moment include, and this is central. At the end of the day, our core as to why we're here is that we're here for the farmer. And so the Western Australia farmer, whether it be from thinking about the next research project to the market, is the core reason as to why we're here. But on top of that, our modus operandi is that we want to operate through strong cross-functional teams, using, as already said, the power of collaboration, using principles of co-design to strengthen impact and also increase adoption. The other thing we're really keen to ensure is it's not the same old. We do need to, in fact, we all need to try different approaches and new activities for mutual benefit. We also need to be open and transparent in what we do. And I think particularly before we even start a project, we actually have to define what is success going to look like for each of the key stakeholders, and how are we going to actually achieve that. And of course, finally, how do we engage in regular public knowledge exchange? And so doing a range of forums is something that we're actually very used to doing within the GGA context. And so, as already said, the hub from our point of view is going to enable us to accelerate many of the things that we've been doing over a number of years. We also have a special relationship with the West Australian Government through the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. The centre of the hub, which is where Tanya is today, has a long history of research. So the Merredin Drylands Research Institute is a key component of the hub. The fact that through the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, or DPIRD as we call it, the fact that staff have been seconded from DPIRD into GGA and also into the hub reinforces those connections. The department and ourselves also have a range of other projects that we do that helps to build the capabilities and capacity of grower groups in Western Australia. And it also helps to connect the state government and ourselves with other agri-technology opportunities. And so we have this wonderful relationship with the department, which helps to underpin both GGA and, by definition, what we want to do and will do with the hub. So some of the things we've already commenced with some activities. Shortly, we'll be announcing the appointment of a permanent hub director. As already mentioned, we launched the hub on the 19th of May. We are out talking to a whole range of stakeholders at the moment, and so myself and a number of staff are doing 2 or 3 stakeholder visits a week. And in essence, that's designed to actually begin to establish the operating credentials and parameters that we'll work with within. We also have a first tender out, and so over the next couple of months, we're going to engage some consultants, and some of those, ideally, they'll be working with our partners to actually do an audit on what have been the research and innovation activities that have actually been undertaken through the Southwest during the last 10 years or so, and what lessons. So when I say research and innovation activities, I mean with looking through a drought lens. So what activities have we been doing that provides lessons for us to use as we go forward? And we actually see this evidence-based piece of research as being really important in helping to provide the platforms for many of the projects that we need to be thinking about as we go forward over the next couple of years. And so there, we're also communicating on every second week through the GGA network. So we have regular updates going out to thousands of farmers and grower groups. And so the launch of the hub was really just a starting point, as said, on the 19th of May to begin to accelerate some of these activities. So in summary, as already mentioned, we are part of the Grower Group Alliance, and that's a critical platform for us. The West Australian farm is the centre of our universe, and so it's all about helping to accelerate ideas from the ground up. Collaboration, and cooperation to succeed in an increasingly competitive and challenging world, where, as many of us in our presentations have alluded to, hotter, drier climates, that's not going to go away. And so how we adapt, how we get the step changes to ensure that we remain successful over the next 10, 20 years and beyond is critical for all of us. And so in our case, utilising and leveraging our existing hub and spoke model to facilitate greater innovation from the ground up is what we're all about. Thank you very much. I hope you've gained something from the last 25 minutes, and we're very happy to take some questions. Back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Tanya. There are questions to be asked. It's not going to go away. That's today's early mantra, I think. Let's get to some questions. First, let's get one from Queensland, from Tracy Henderson, that's the CSIRO in Queensland. To Graham in particular, could you expand on your statement regarding innovation capability slipping behind international competitors? And Tracy is asking, what are the useful measures of innovation capability, Graham?
Oh, nothing like a simple question to get things going. It's a great question, actually, Tracy. I think so. Look, I could, and I have a history of research and innovation. I've run large R&D groups overseas. So to answer you specifically, there's no doubt that Australia for decades has been absolutely world class in a lot of our research, particularly through CSIRO and the universities. But I think most of us would say we haven't always commercialised that well. We also, and there's a range of studies that reinforce this, we don't tend to collaborate particularly well. And so there's some of the challenges that the Innovation Hub gives us an opportunity to focus on and do better. Because I think, and I learnt some of this when I went and reviewed the Israeli innovation system 3 years ago. And while every country has its own specific set of challenges and solutions, which generally you cannot transfer from one country to another, I think one of the things that the Israelis do well is that, yes, you have to invent new knowledge, but if that's all you do, if you can't utilise it effectively, well then the system does come down on you pretty hard. So I think it's that combination of not only discovery and developing new knowledge, but also it's how we use it. And so I think the types of things that the Grower Group Alliance have been doing for a long period of time, and what the hub is going to do is put one small snapshot on where we can improve, because we have the talent. We have, sometimes I get frustrated. I think we're our own worst enemies in that we've got all the basic building blocks here. So I think the hub is one vehicle to accelerate, particularly collaboration, and trying to get a better balance between, in essence, top-down research and bottom-up. So I could go on, but that's a quick response.
Yeah, that's a theme that's emerged, getting that balance right between what's handed down from above and what's brought up from below. Another question now, Leon Barmuta is asking, and I know having lived in the West for 18 months, water quality and salinity are always issues. I'll just say another R word, reticulation. I don't know which of you can answer this. What is the forecast for salinity as the drying trend we saw continues? Are there any forecasts? Is there any modelling there?
Look, Tanya might have a look. I'm sure there is. Off the top of my head, I'm not. I don't know what the exact modelling is at the moment, but certainly the underlying premise of the question is that yes, salinity is a problem. Tanya, are you able to add anything on? With regards to that question?
I don't profess to be an expert in this area either, but I certainly have a lot of salinity on my own farm, and I know that it's not going anywhere, even though we are doing some amazing things by establishing perennials, how we, I guess the production systems that we run through those saline areas. But as a whole, it's not, I don't think it's increasing whilst we are doing the right activities to put in place, but we can't stop. And I guess that's the whole message that from the Southwest we've been saying. So whilst we know salinity is an issue and it's been around for a long time, it will increase if we don't, put those, great pieces of research together. and work at it, I guess, from a few different angles. I know there's some really good work going on with the department in terms of desalination work, and I know that's a big piece of work that's happening. So in parts of the state, it is a real and massive problem, and particularly when our groundwater is so close to the surface, and there's a lot there, so we need to start thinking about systems, and if we can look at desal units and turn around and look at how we might be able to do some irrigation utilising that water in a better way, then that could be a great outcome for a few different enterprises on farm. So yeah, salinity is a major issue, and it's still got a lot of work to do.
And the clock has beaten us. We have questions in the bank, but we're going to have to go elsewhere because we have a schedule to keep to. But Tanya, Graham, thank you so much for joining us. And rest assured, those of you who asked questions we haven't got to, they are being taken note of. They're being captured, as we say, and members of the FDF team will be looking at them. And you can also get in touch with the FDF team via fdfhubs@awe.gov.au. The hubs are formally known as Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hubs. And I don't think there's been any hub that's been more innovative and resilient in the last 24 hours or so. The one that we call the Northern WA and Northern Territory Hub, because there have been lockdowns in the top end in the NT, have been changing arrangements in WA. So rather than a single presentation, I'm going to become an honorary top ender for the next half hour by linking our speakers. And there is our first speaker, and that's Dr. Steve Rogers. Hello there, Steve. I believe you are the hub director up there in Darwin. Is that the case?
No, I'm not actually. I'm I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor Research and Innovation at Charles Darwin Uni. We are yet to appoint our hub director, but we have Jed Matz, who some people will know from CRC Northern Australia, who we're contracting at the moment to help us and while we go through the recruitment process for our director.
Well, thanks for being with us, and take it away.
Okay, thank you. Now, I believe we have a video to start, do we, Annabelle?
We do, indeed we do. Let's take a look at an overview of what's going on up in the top end in Northern WA and the Northern Territory.
G'day, my name is Andrew Dalgleish. I'm an organic mango and asparagus farmer from Katherine. As a farmer, I always need to be prepared for drought and climatic extremes. That just comes with farming in the north. As an industry, we have developed our knowledge and farming practices to help us to grow and build a life in this special region. But more needs to be done. As the effects of climate change increase and the global demand for agricultural product rises, we need to be smarter about how we farm. A Drought and Innovation Hub will transform the way producers and communities farm and prepare for drought. A hub in Darwin with nodes across the region will make it easier for producers to access technology and the resources to innovate and enhance our bottom line. Producers from the region look forward to engaging with the hub and building our knowledge to become more productive and resilient for our future. Importantly, the hub will develop and promote sustainability practices for the benefit of our communities and the environment. A Drought Resilient Adoption and Innovation Hub will drive the future of agriculture and help to revitalise our regional communities in the north. The north is the future of agriculture in Australia. This hub will be the catalyst for its growth and development.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd just like to start with saying what a great pleasure it is to be here today. I'd like to commence with acknowledging that I personally am currently on the traditional lands of the Larrakia people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and give apologies from Auntie Billawara Lee, who's one of our Larrakia elders, who unfortunately, due to the changing circumstances in the top end of the NT is not able to be with us here today. But I'd also like to acknowledge that the hub covers the traditional lands of many different First Nation peoples, both here in the Northern Territory and in Western Australia. And again, I pay my respects to those elders past, present and emerging. So, Northern WA&NT Drought Resilience and Adoption Hub. So I'll provide a brief overview and then I'll be handing over to one of my colleagues in Western Australia who will take you through what we're planning to do and where we're going. So I've just been introduced. So I'm the Acting Pro Vice Chancellor Research and Innovation at Charles Darwin University, one of the partners in the hub. I think we win the prize for having the biggest hub. So our hub covers an area of just over 2.2 million square kilometres, but with a population of about 345,000 people. We will be having a node in Perth simply because that's where some of our key partners are located. If we look at production in this part of the world, in this region, so I was just watching the WA presentation, you know, billions and billions of dollars. So our cropping agriculture, horticulture, broadacre cropping and forestry is about $457 million a year value of production. And our rangelands grass-fed beef is just a tad over $1 billion a year value of production. It's very important for us all to realise that in this part of the world, Indigenous Australians are very much the primary stakeholders in rural industries. Over 50% of the Northern Territory is under native title, and I would suggest it's a similar position in the northern part of WA. There's also a large number of Indigenous commercial enterprises, Indigenous pastoral stations. So Indigenous people are a very, very important part of the partnership and the beneficiaries moving forward of the Northern WA&NT Hub. We also recognise that the native harvests are incredibly important to Indigenous livelihoods, and changing climate, drought periods causing the drying up of permanent water holes, for instance, that have very significant cultural value. It is an important element of drought resilience, adoption, innovation here in the Northern Territory. How can we ensure that those various areas that are utilised by Indigenous people as part of their native harvest and their cultural lifestyle are going to be protected? So what are our challenges here in Northern Australia? So a harsh, remote, diverse landscape with extreme climatic conditions. So our climatic zones go from the dry tropics in the top part of the Northern Territory and Western Australia, all the way through the rangelands to Central Australian arid zone. I'd like to make the point that people might think that the top end of Darwin is lush tropical region, but we're in effect in drought for 6 months of the year during our dry season. So we have very extreme climate variability, very extreme water availability between our wet and dry seasons. Very small population, as you saw from that initial slide. Poor regional connectivity. Digital connectivity in remote and very remote parts of Northern Australia is still a major issue, as is the provision of services into very remote parts of Australia, where certainly a lot of our production, our pastoral sector is based. Inverse economies of scale in Northern Australia. Limited access to information flowing through from poor regional connectivity. Cultural linguistic variability and uniqueness. Many Indigenous people who live in very remote areas do not speak English as a first language, and sometimes it might be a third language. Water insecurity. Water security is a real major issue. People think we've got a lot of water up here in Northern Australia. That's not in fact the case. And it's fair to say that compared to southern parts of the country, our extension, adoption and commercialisation is very much in its infancy. If one was to look at take for instance the live export trade, or the Northern Territory mango industry, if we looked at them 15 years ago, those industries have innovated and expanded significantly in that period of time, but it's still very early days, certainly for a lot of our industries. So just to run quickly through who our core partners are in the hub. So key industry associations, so the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association, the Kimberley-Pilbara Cattlemen's Association, and the Northern Territory Farmers Association. We are about producers, as was previously mentioned by the Southwest WA Hub, but we are also about regional, rural and remote and very remote communities and Indigenous peoples living in those parts of Northern Australia. The two key NRM groups here in Northern Australia, so Rangelands NRM and Territory NRM, the Natural Resource Management Agencies supported through the National Landcare Program. These guys are real boots on the ground in most of the region that we're working in, and very key important players in terms of a lot of our potential extension and adoption activity. Regional Development Australia, a consortium of the Northern Territory, Kimberley and Pilbara RDAs, again an important group of organisations in terms of northern development. One of the points I'd like to make is that, you know, people and the government and the Commonwealth talks a lot about developing Northern Australia. There's significant potential for primary industry expansion in Northern Australia, but you know, a lot of challenges there to overcome, especially in terms of drought and climate change. Charles Darwin University. So Charles Darwin University is the only university in Northern Territory. When we say we're a dual sector institution, what that means is that we offer both vocational educational training as well as higher education and research. And last but certainly not least, the two government departments, the WA Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development and the Northern Territory Department of Industry, Tourism and Trade, which has within that department responsibility for the agricultural industries and ag sector, very important partners. These guys have histories of extension and adoption and important partners going forward. So there are what we refer to as our core partners. But then we have a number of what we refer to as Drought Consortium supporting partners. So these partners, and Paulina from Matawera will talk to you at the end of this talk. A number of other industry bodies, the Centre Farm, Top End Farm, a number of catchment groups, the biosecurity associations, as well as Meat and Livestock Australia, Darwin Innovation Hub and their Pascalis Innovation Fund, which is a Northern Territory-based equity investment fund. So if we have opportunities or commercialisation products, we have a partner there that is an equity investor. And then the four universities in WA, Notre Dame, Murdoch, University of WA and Curtin University, who are other supporting partners. It's also probably fair to say that there's many potential partners missing from that list, and one of the initial tasks of the hub is to engage with further partners that represent the key stakeholder groups within the focus of the hub moving forward. So that's it from me. I'd like to now hand over to Emma White from the Kimberley-Pilbara Cattlemen's Association, who will continue telling us about the Drought Hub. Thanks, Emma. You're on mute, Emma. Emma, you're on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry all, I've just only got one screen. I thought the coordinators were able to unmute me, obviously not. Okay, so my name's Emma White. I am working with the Kimberley-Pilbara Cattlemen's Association, as Steve mentioned. I'm based in Broome, so I would like to acknowledge the Yawuru traditional owners, past, present and future. It would have been lovely, obviously, to have been to gone back to Darwin, but unfortunately COVID has presented that. So what I'm going to cover off is more the research, development, extension, adoption and innovation aspects of the Northern WA&NT Drought Resilience Innovation Hub. Now, with the Kimberley-Pilbara Cattlemen's Association specifically, but also obviously through Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association, NT Farmers, we obviously have significant experience in terms of connecting in with all the research and development priorities that are developed to guide research and development projects, whether it's through the likes of Meat and Livestock Australia, funded projects, the MLA donor company and other organisations, and making sure they are then practical ways through things like field days, conferences, and other sort of grassroots engagement events, and making sure they're effectively communicated. That will obviously be one of the key challenges for the Drought Hub, is that making sure that any new research and development or the existing knowledge base or innovations are then obviously able to connect it in across the broad range of interested stakeholders, organisations, and obviously getting that really good network of connectivity and collaboration across not only Northern WA, but into the Northern Territory as well, where there are already a lot of good, obviously, supply chain synergies. And we really need to cut through, I guess, and identify where there's relevant knowledge. And sometimes, you know, we find that in producers. Again, the knowledge base, the need to do sort of genuine gap analysis and work out where there's opportunities for improvement, and addressing again the various barriers to making sure producers and other key land managers, stakeholders have actually got knowledge and access to the best information. We also need to make sure we've got that effective network in place to make sure that whatever expertise, research and development technology connects through to practical outcomes and practical ways of educating and sharing knowledge and transmitting, sharing practices and information. And again, there's some really practical ways that can be done that certainly KPCA has got good experience in. In terms of the overall hub capabilities with the various collaborating organisations, there's a good diverse mix of, and also complementarity of expertise across, again, the broad range of research development, and then that practical sort of implementation of extension adoption, but also into the commercialisation of technologies. And there's a good proven track record of co-design, obviously building on collaboration and partnership through various sort of funding projects. So just for example, from a KPCA perspective, we've implemented projects through Meat and Livestock Australia, through WA DPIRD, including in relation to irrigated fodder development, and also worked with CSIRO and AgForce in Queensland, as well as NTCA on the Northern Beef Situational Analysis for the Cooperative Research Centre for Northern Australia, just as but a few examples. Again, there's good experience amongst the network of collaborators and techniques to promote practice change at scale. And I'll touch on that a bit just at the end with a few slides specifically on some work KPCA has done and some of the challenges we've identified as well, just in our engagement and conversations with the WA Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development. All of the collaborators basically have an established network of staff in the Northern Territory and Northern WA, so we're covering off on basically Darwin, Katherine, Broome, Tennant Creek, Alice Springs, Port Hedland, Carnarvon, Carafa, Port Hedland and Kununurra. And just there are some discussions obviously going on with the Southern WA Hub as well, just to clarify what the northern boundary is, because there's a little bit of overlap potentially in the geographic scopes of what the Southern WA Hub will do into the southern rangelands or the southern pastoral area in WA, and then where we sort of focus then on what the northern WA&NT Hub will actually be doing. And again, there's really good broad range of specialist expertise knowledge in the network we're bringing together of the collaborating organisations. And as Steve mentioned, the really important work we have to do to identify, there's another range of stakeholders that need to be identified and networking. For example, the Northern Australia Beef Research Council and the Regional Beef Research Committees will also be important stakeholders. One of the key things in terms of activities we're looking at, and as mentioned previously, is the importance of developing a knowledge bank. Again, some of this isn't actually about reinventing the wheel, it's actually doing a comprehensive, if you like, horizon scan or identification of various currently available capacity programs, research, the documents, etc., and how recognise the gaps. Sometimes what we tend to find is that there have been really good programs in the past that perhaps due to funding cycles and other things weren't continued, and it's a matter of capitalising those. We certainly find that the case sometimes with publications out of print, which pastoralists have found really useful. So, for example, pasture identification guides, those sorts of things, which they just tend to not have had funding to keep them current and moving on. Those sorts of things can help with obviously positive land management in conditions, where there's resilience required and sort of variability at play. Lessons obviously are very, very important, and I think it's also educating the broader community, government and other stakeholders about landholders, land management, pastoralists have to deal with when they're dealing with drought, climate resilience, climate variability. And I'll show you a slide just to give you a bit of an indication of that just towards the end. Again, it's important to engage producers to understand their experiences, and again, from a KPCA perspective, we find it's useful to have practical workshops to bring people together to share their learnings and talk about how to better manage conditions into the future, and they're very practical ways for people to learn. And identifying outcomes is obviously critical in terms of current strategies in place, again, and getting some continuity. That can be one of the challenges. Sort of stock funding can impact programs and then impact sort of the ability for continual, sustainable and strategic outcomes. So it's really important for ongoing implementation. Planning for drought resilient businesses, that's just fundamental. Really sound business practices, business planning for scenarios. You'll appreciate it in the slide I get to at the end around the complex array of decisions at any one time a pastoralist, for example, has to consider when they're dealing with dry seasonal conditions, drought conditions. It's really, really complex, and I think it helps to understand that the number of factors at play. And it's about not perhaps bombarding people with too much information, but again, effective communication and conveyance of information is going to be really, really important in terms of being successful in planning and future resilience. And then again, good management decisions, good planning, good information. It's all about your ability to gear up and make decisions, sound information, and again, manage for scenarios. One of the things, again, technology's obviously got a significant role to play. So enhancing production and sustainability will be important. Again, technology, whether it's satellite monitoring, whether it's drones as management tools, satellite monitoring is probably really coming into the fore in terms of how pastoralists in particular can ground truth that and use that to better help them understand how to manage whether it's pasture, whether it's land condition. There's various tools emerging in the Territory and WA also in that regard. And again, for us, that a need to effectively communicate, not just communicate and bombard with information, but to ensure there's effective communication, to ensure practical learning extension opportunities, and acknowledge there's current good practice. And it's important to on that as well and to convey those examples. Water security and efficiency of use is obviously a big issue. It's very, very topical in the Northern Territory and Northern WA, including improving management of water in the landscape to strengthen drought resilience. So, for example, KPCA has funding through the Commonwealth Smart Farms program, which enables us to do some rangeland with experts from throughout the country, and also ecologically sustainable rangelands management plans, which a number of pastoralists, certainly in the north of WA, have, and they're getting planning tools. Using, again, of enabling technology and storage of surface water, that is, again, very topical in the Territory and northern WA, and then managing the impact of surface water harvesting on the environment. So for us, and in, I think, the Territory as well, the CSIRO Northern Australia Water Resource Assessments have been important tools to inform groundwater surface water modelling, considerations of land capability, and also potential for irrigation scenarios, but also the work through WA DPIRD. It's just published a really comprehensive technical bulletin on mosaic irrigation, which also builds off some earlier work that KPCA has done also on practical considerations for pastoralists looking to get into irrigated fodder development to help with, again, resilience planning. So this is, again, I'm not expecting you to read this diagram, but this is an exercise that Graham Mackay, who works with KPCA, who's ex-Rangelands NRM, did when KPCA was doing some work with WA DPIRD back in 2019 in response to some significant animal welfare incidents we'd had in the Kimberley and Pilbara as a result of what we called the dry season response. Now, that's a bit of a nuance because WA doesn't declare drought. What this is to highlight is the complex array of decisions and factors pastoralists have to juggle at any one time when they're dealing with ongoing dry season conditions. Now, what the flip side of that is, even though we've had a very good wet season over the most recent wet season, in actual fact, we're having some unseasonal rain in the Pilbara and Kimberley just over the last week or so. Basically is that we're now on the flip side of that, where, say, for example, in the Kimberley, we've got very high fuel load, so high levels of vegetation, obviously grasses, which means there's a lot of proactive, we've now got significant fire risk, there's a lot of preventative burning going on through DFES and in collaboration with pastoralists and other land managers to attempt to get on top of that. Then we see another aspect of that, say, for example, in Carnarvon, the horticultural areas, where with tropical cyclone Seroja a few months ago, which impacted Kalbarri, they've lost, and other wet season events, they've lost significant amounts of topsoil, which they're in discussions with the WA government about having to sort of look at replacing that. So these have been really important tools for us to help explain also to government the risks of stop-start funding on programs, and that the way their funding works, for example, through various funding buckets, quite often isn't sustainable and long-term and strategic enough to enable comprehensive ongoing identification and support for various land management factors, and the way they all interrelate to each other. So say, for example, poor land condition does knock on to animal welfare outcomes. You know, it's just understanding the interrelationship between lots of complex factors. That's it from me. Thanks very much for your time.
And in Broome, thanks very much, Emma, for that. We're going on quite a journey, thousands and thousands of kilometres. We're now going to Dr. Ampolina, who's going to tell us about what's been going on in the Fitzroy River. And there you are. Hello there, Anne. Can you hear us here in Canberra?
Yes, I can. So, Najikurajan, Nyambo Buriyaru, and Jugan Country. Ngayo Imaraman and Ngai Mandajara Nigananga. So I'm just saying hello. I'm on Yaru and Jugan Country in Broome. I am the executive chair of the Matawarra Fitzroy River Council, which is an amalgamation of 6 independent Indigenous nations who've come together to stand in solidarity in terms of how we collectively manage the Fitzroy River. So very, very good that we've got an opportunity to share with the conversation today. So I also want to acknowledge that Indigenous people are and have always been the first farmers in this land in terms of we have managed our estate from the beginning of time. I also want to share with those of you that may not be aware, but we are talking about a catchment system that is over 96,000 square kilometres. So one of the big things is that Aboriginal people, we do not separate land, water and people. They are intrinsically entwined. So when we look at how we deal with complexity, we acknowledge that we need collective wisdom, that we all need to bring our systems thinking and our evidence base into dealing with complexity. I want to acknowledge also the previous presenters who talked to us about real life, a lived experience, and the variability that we have to live with going into just development on just terms in the process going forward. So from that perspective, the Fitzroy River, the Fitzroy catchment is definitely on the table in regards to how we're looking at development within this system. Today, the Western Australian government is closing or calling for the submissions in response to the Derby groundwater allocation plan. And so what we are very concerned about and what we believe we need to do is bring all this collective wisdom in so that we can look at how do we have just development on just terms, particularly in the Fitzroy River. So one of the big things is the Fitzroy River is definitely under a lot of pressure. I think one of the big issues that really impacts on the well-being, the livelihoods and the lifeways of Indigenous people is climate change. Climate change is very, very real. We are seeing water scarcity. We are seeing our food insecurity. We are seeing all of these livelihoods that are very much at risk. And what we are taught as Indigenous people is that when we're born into this world, we are told to be observational. So the elders have taught us to look up in the sky, down in the ground, and to look at what the environment is sharing with us as we live in a coexistence with this environment, and particularly this amazing river system, which is also 733 kilometres long. So many of you may know that the Fitzroy River is National Heritage listed, which means it belongs to every Australian, and indeed, because it is globally unique, it belongs to the world. Most importantly, the Fitzroy River is also the largest registered Aboriginal cultural heritage site in Western Australia. So we want to make sure that any development that comes to the region is looking at precautionary principles, is looking at informed consent, is looking at all of the evidence around us. And one of those pieces of evidence was the Auditor General report several years ago, which said that the rangelands have been heavily impacted on by intensive agriculture, particularly through the pastoral industry. And we need to look at how do we preserve and support livelihoods for all, because obviously we also have many of our Indigenous farmers who are also running pastoral leases. So we need to make sure that if we've got a conversation on the table about livelihoods, then how do we do that in a sustainable way? What does sustainability look like, given that we are in a climate crisis right now, where even though we had a big wet, if you go to Fitzroy Crossing right now, you will see on one side of the bridge, the system is totally empty and there is drainage happening across the other side. So the Marawarra Fitzroy River is very much out there in terms of how we are going to sit around the table, all of us, looking at how we will develop and drought-proof this system so that it is here for generations to come. So part of that story is exactly what I'm saying, is that we need to bring in collective wisdom. We need to ensure that development in Northern Australia is evidence-based, and that the views and the evidence coming from Indigenous people is very much on the table. I did mention that today in Western Australia we have the submissions for the response to the Derby groundwater plan, and we need to be proceeding with caution, because what that system was showing us 30 years ago was that we already had saltwater intrusion. So with climate change, we are seeing changes in these systems. We also are aware that there is great demand, particularly in the Greater Derby area, to start to look at issuing water licences to be able to support development right across the area, and that includes Indigenous development. We have an amazing organisation that is looking to get into aquaculture and all of these sorts of industries. And so we're talking about how do we come together as citizens in the region and start to look at how we manage our greatest resource, which is water. And part of that story I want to share a little film that we've made just to say that we are coming and we're saying that we have a history of Aboriginal people working with all stakeholders. We have a history of having a Fitzroy Catchment Committee, and what we're saying is that we believe that this there is a way to sit with all of us at the table so that we can have a bioregional framework, so that we can look at freshwater, saltwater interface, how we look at the systems around us within this catchment to do development on just terms. But it must be evidence-based. We must be factoring in climate change, because what we've just heard is that we're going to have 28% less rainfall in WA, and even though we had a good wet season, we need to look at it over time. What are the predictions for the next 10 years going forward in regards to development? How do we sustain the livelihoods and the well-being of Indigenous people on country? So in closing, I think there's a real opportunity through this hub to start to look at some of the new economies, particularly given that we are the first farmers of this land. And there's great opportunity in terms of wild harvest. There's great opportunity in terms of bioprospecting. How do we get patents and copyright right? How do we sit together at the table as equals? We want to make a point that as Indigenous people, we make up 70% of the catchment, and that we do not perceive ourselves as stakeholders. We're shareholders. We've been here from the beginning of time, managing our estate. We want to work in collaboration with all of those economies and industries out there, but how do we do it in a sustainable way? And I'd like to finish my presentation to say that this is where we're going, and we believe that this is a great opportunity to work with the Cattlemen's Association, to work with all of the universities who are partnering, to start to look at how do we do business differently. So from that perspective, I just want to share in my closing with a little film. If it gets a bit jumpy, I'd rather it not be shown, but let's see how we go. So from that perspective, we want a unity pathway. We believe a bioregional framework is the best way to proceed, where all of us are at the table. Nothing is off the table. It's informed by evidence and science, but also the science and the wisdom of Indigenous people to look at how we do business differently in the Fitzroy catchment. So if we can go to the film, I'm happy to close now. So Galia Mabu, and thank you for this opportunity, but we're very, very excited about an opportunity to do business differently, particularly in Northern Australia. Thank you.
Maduara, Maduara, Yanai, Maduara, Maduara, Linjir Bangai, Linjir Bangai, no, Linjir Bangai, Linjir Bangai, no, Maduara, Maduara, Yanai, Maduara, Maduara. We sing that story about this river, you know. My favorite story, when people ask me, I always sing this song. Maduara. It's very important to me, this river. I love it river, you know. How can Kapman gonna try to take over the river? Kapman didn't born in this river. We born in alongside of the river. You know, we should be the one that own the river, not Kapman. It's law. We got a law too, you know, and the river got the law. This river got story, you know, big history. That Wallunga stream. If river gonna go dry, that's, you know, kill the culture. We need to, you know, fight for this river, not to drain all the water out. Maduara, Maduara, Yanai. Money is nothing, you know. But the life is river there forever.
Rivers must have a right to life, and their contribution to all other life must be protected. Some are fearful that the humans lead their own extinction. I have hope in human beings, for living water lives within them too. It's their life they must save if they are to continue living on Mother Earth. Mother Earth covered in living waters, cradled beneath the sky. I keep on singing as I believe a coalition of hope is coming. I sing this to you, singing the River Law song for people and country.
Thank you for that film, Anne. And just before we go from the Northern WA&NT Hub, just one very quick question, because we are not so much racing the clock, but we need to keep to schedule. As Anne said, look up at the sky, look down at the ground. Steve, in terms of the ground in your hub area, you've got a line drawn which is between jurisdictions, Western Australia and the Northern Territory. How much of a challenge is that for your people at your hub?
I think it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity, quite frankly. It's a great opportunity for organisations that maybe have not traditionally worked with each other to be working across those lines on a map, those political boundaries. I think the challenge for us is simply the huge scale of the region. So not a problem, it's an opportunity. I think we certainly already have brought together a number of partners into this hub that before we actually started discussing putting the bid together have not traditionally worked with each other. So I think the Future Drought Fund Hub program has already had a success up here that we're actually starting to talk to each other in the first instance.
Well, thank you, Steve, Emma and Anne, for talking to us today from all around, and have a great day.
Thank you.
That's the final one of our hubs today. 6 down, 2 to go. SA and Victoria tomorrow. I've just done a back of the envelope calculation, and I think we've travelled somewhere between 15,000 and just shy of 20,000 K in the last hour and a half, between going from Canberra to Hobart to Merredin to Darwin to Broome to the Fitzroy River, back to Darwin, back to Canberra. Amazing, part of this Future Drought Fund Science to Practice Forum. Well, many of the things we've just heard about from our 3 hubs, we're going to not so much expand upon them, but develop them in the next little while, because our next presentation is about embedding the knowledge and perspectives of Indigenous practice, and an initiative called Jindaola, which has been developed in consultation with elders and knowledge holders as a way of understanding country. It was going to be presented all in one place at the University of Wollongong, but our presenters are in 2 separate places to talk about their work. Pascal and Jade, lovely to see you, and I think this will be a splendid follow-on to what we've heard in the last hour and a half. So take it away.
Thank you. I think I'm going to start. Hi, everyone. I think, Jade, you've got your microphone on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but if I've got echo, sorry. So I'm Professor Pascal Perez. I'm the director of the Smart Infrastructure Facility at the University of Wollongong. University of Wollongong is part of the Southern New South Wales Hub, led by Charles University. We will contribute 4 of our regional campuses to the hub as future nodes, namely Bega, Batmans Bay, Nara, and Moss Vale. These campuses are already actively involved in R&D activities through innovation hubs in Bega and Moss Vale, and more recently the Industry 4.0 hub in Nara, funded by Department of Education. Importantly, all these nodes, these campuses, have already deep connections with First Nations people and knowledges. And so that's why it's really my great pleasure to introduce to you all my colleague, Jade Kennedy. Jade Kennedy is a proud Huron man from the Illawarra and south coast of New South Wales. He's also the academic developer of Indigenous knowledges at the University of Wollongong, and which is the topic of today's presentation by Jade, the leader of our internationally acclaimed Jindaola program. Floor is yours, Jade.
Thank you, Pascal, and thank you, everybody. I guess for me, I do want to start by acknowledging country, because for us, before embarking on any knowledge sharing, we need to acknowledge that what we do know has been gifted us from country. And today I'm sharing with you mob from Yuin country, And the mountain that you see in this slide before you, this is Jira. And she's our grandmother, or depending, she can be our older sister, Marman. But we acknowledge that all things do come from country, that the knowledges and the perspectives we're going to share today, they come from country, and that our times together sharing are also from country. For me today, I do want to just say thank you for the opportunity to be able to share into this space and this conversation. It's an extremely important and significant issue for our nation and for all of our communities. And I do want to also just acknowledge Pascal for his passion and insight into how, you know, like Aboriginal knowledges can play a role in the response to the healing of our countries. It's been a real point of pride, you know, for me to have the opportunity to share Jindaola and share it with the institution, but also, you know, have an opportunity to share that with you all today. And I just want to take a bit of a moment to explain the program in its context at the University of Wollongong, and then sort of move into how this program's been adapted and applied outside of the institution, and hopefully and possibly how it can be applied to other countries and other contexts across Australia, and specifically for this conversation around drought resilience, yeah? So if I just continue on, I've got to work through. Are you following seeing them slides? This thing be confuses me. But as a way of introduction, Jindaola in our language is the great goanna. And for me, this is a thing that has been gifted to us at the university, this word and this term, and then the underpinning philosophies. We worked very hard with our Aboriginal community up and down the coast, and to bring Jindaola to life in this way within the institution. So Jindaola is from the dreaming for us, this goanna who walks from place to place, and he teaches us proper way. And, you know, if you think about the goanna, how he moves and how he rests and sits, you know, those places where he rests and he sits, they become those places where protocol is embedded. They become our significant and sacred places. So at UOW, Jindaola comes about through an 18-month program. And this program walks a number of different interdisciplinary teams, what we end up calling a cohort, through phases of unlearning and learning. So our participants are both academic and professional staff, and they go through a combination of formal and informal gatherings. So our formal gatherings are all off campus and on country. So we get the opportunity to meet with our communities at our community centres. We get to spend time in the scrub. We're very blessed within this region to be able to, you know, only go a couple of minutes, and, you know, we can be surrounded by beautiful rainforest or on a headland, you know. So this country, as I was sort of trying to share earlier, is a very significant teacher for us. And then we have these informal gatherings, which we have either on or more so today, sort of on Zoom even, you know, but a lot of work gets done in these informal spaces as we move and work towards our formal spaces. And I hope what's starting to come through is that you guys can see that we've modelled this, and I'll explain this a bit more, on Aboriginal ways of maintaining knowledge integrity. So sort of what you see before you is some of our teams and some of our groups articulations of the ways in which they engage with the concepts. So some of the learning that we bring them through, for example, are concepts of country, kinship, culture, journey and connectedness. And as we're sharing these concepts with our participants, we're asking them to engage in this practice of artefact creation. And this practice is to help them develop their intimate relationship with their place and with their constructs and contexts, but also their relationship with the actual concept. And so if I speak about country, we're talking, what's your physical relationship to place? If we talk about kinship, What's your interpersonal relationship with place? So what we're doing is building this sort of multi-layered interrelationship with our landscape and appreciating that our landscape is a knowledge landscape. As our participants start to engage and really become accustomed to this knowledge-based relationship, we're introducing them as experts around their particular disciplinary knowledges, and we're starting to build relationships with the relevant Aboriginal knowledges that are grounded in this place. So we're trying to privilege the knowledges that are embedded within place to then thereafter sort of inform the teaching that occurs within the institution so that it is grounded. And, you know, this relationship is to be that sort of one-to-one, you know, there's no above and beyond. You know, we've created a bit of a space in this nation where embedding has sort of meant week 13 or, you know, we're shoving something in. So we're really, really clear on we're trying to build these relationships and we're trying to keep them grounded in place. The philosophy and the approach is grounded in what a certain set of practices, and we use 6 R's. And so we use the values of respect, responsibility and reciprocity. And these principles or values are described quite quickly, but obviously carry right through the program over the 18 months. And participants are encouraged to consistently engage and articulate the development of their understanding of these values as they're moving through the process. And we sort of guide through the customs of regularity, routine and relevance. So this is that moving in and out, and it's place-based. So we live within a strip along the New South Wales coast where you've got a highlands and a lowlands. We've got an escarpment and we've got our sort of, you know, beachside headlands and flatlands and wetlands. And so the relationship is a way in which we sort of move in and out with our knowledges. We sort of take a high view, an overarching view of the knowledges that we're learning, and then we sort of come down onto the flatlands and we engage, and then we move back up. So there's this constant moving in and out, and that's guided by this philosophy and it's guided by these sets of practices. Now, the program also really involves a deep engagement with community. And as I was saying before, we're quite blessed within our country and our space. And so as we're walking our participants through, you'll see here, this is our Aboriginal Community Centre in Wollongong. And what we're doing is we're trying to engage our participants in a way, and we call it right way of engaging with our peoples. And so through this, we're, you know, sharing concepts around right people, you know, right place, right language, right time, right way. We're trying to move our participants into a way of being, in a way of engaging, in a way of exchange with our knowledge holders so that we can bring about these new knowledges and these new creations that can be. And I just really want to say, like, this program is an Aboriginal approach and it's grounded with ceremony. And so as we're passing through these knowledges and our participants are engaging with our community and with our country, it's quite transformative. It's quite transformative. So it's not only a professional sort of staff development activity, it's quite a personal set of developments because it's really grounded in country and the knowledge is held within country. And so people, as they're passing through, are also engaging and learning some of the intimate knowledges that exist within this place and space from an Aboriginal perspective, yeah? This is the underpinning, I guess, diagram that helps explain the way. And I wanted to just share those pictures to say, look, this is, you know, a way of identifying with a lot of the things that we engage in and do, but this is the way, and this is the underpinning nature of what we do. And so what you've got at either ends of this diagram, we call these big bora. And for us, a bora, you can see there's the depiction of people sitting, but we've got 5 rings, and for us, 5 is a very, very significant number. And the way in which these boras are represented within this diagram is that they're communities of knowledge. They're bounded knowledge systems. they've got an integrity and a validity that exists within their realms. So at either end, for us within the institution, you've got the university and the knowledge systems that exist and abound within the institution. And then you've got our community or communities of knowledge that are held within our people and our country. What you've got going between, you see these tracks, they're the tracks of Jindaola. If you can think about the way the Gwenna moves, that's his tail and his footprints. This is how it is. But we call these knowledge tracks. And this is a knowledge-based approach. We're talking knowledge-based relationships. So you'll see in the first instance, these tracks move themselves towards what we call campfires. You see the 4 depictions of people sitting, and there's a spiral. It's an open spiral. It's not bounded. So these are the places and spaces that we use at times to represent faculty or some of our interdisciplinary teams. And this is a place where new knowledge, you know, these sort of collaborations, this space where co-creation starts to exist, starts to manifest. And as these new knowledges become a bit of a thing and a bit understood, they move into what we call these little boards. So just in between those campfires, you'll see the representation of these 2 small borers. And this is where the validation of these newly created knowledges starts to exist before they have to then go back to these big borer. And so what you've got is the ways in which knowledges move from bounded systems to open systems to integrated systems and then back again, so that what we've got is a flow of knowledge and information around the ways in which we can address particular issues and find solutions collectively as a community of knowledge holders that are bringing expertise from a whole range of different places and spaces. We could talk about this one forever, but this is the grounding depiction for the way in which Jindaola operates, yes, within the institution, but I think if you sit and spend time, you can see how this is actually an old way, a way that moves beyond the institution, but sits within our country, and the way in which our communities used to share knowledge and engage in the ways in which we would come about solutions that was inclusive of everyone and everything, including country. For me, I just wanted to share some of the impacts. You know, I don't want to spend too much time on these, but this is just to give you guys a gauge of how we've been progressing over the last 4 years within the institution. We've had some nice impacts outside of the institution as well. And, you know, there's been some recognition within this context, within the higher education context. And that's been really lovely for us to get a bit of traction. We've been able to write a couple of articles now. And again, this is a really lovely way within this sort of academy and the way in which we articulate the things we're doing, a lovely way to start sharing, you know, our wins, our losses, or the things that we're learning as we move along. And we're also in this place and space where we're starting to be able to inform some other research practices that are occurring, you know, locally and a little bit beyond as well. So for me, part of this is really sharing with you how we've been able to adjust and adapt Jindaola and its success within the institution into a place and space now where we're contributing to our broader community. What we've done quite recently is just move it out of the university context and make an adaptation that we're calling at this moment Naingang Yamba. And for us, our language doesn't necessarily translate quite easily. Naingang Yamba it is come and sit with me, but it's sort of like, here, come and have a look, or hey, you here, come and listen. It's a way of getting someone's attention around something you want to share. You know, this knowledge that we want to be engaging with, this exchange. So come sit with me. And for us, this is generally focused and engaged when we're talking about our interconnectedness with country. So we've had the opportunity to pilot this Naingang Yamba in the context, I guess, of the Lake Illawarra. So we've been able to centre a project around the lake. And for us, it's a very special and significant place, you know, for our peoples. And Mulawang, in this instance, is the area we call the mouth of the lake. And at the mouth of our lake, we have a large island we call Gangmangang, and they're very related to the dreaming stories of this particular place. So there's a lot of cultural significance, but what you also have is a construct where the lake has a management committee, and this management committee has representatives, across all tiers of government and other interested organisations, but it's generally around environmental-based decision-making. And what we've sort of identified and found through some of the projects that we're running is that the environmental values are quite difficult to articulate within decision-making processes at times. So what we've done is we've adapted the program, and we're finding ways in which we can be engaging our participants, in this particular instance, these government representatives and others, there's some community representatives in there as well, around a deeper understanding of the ways in which Aboriginal people understand country. So moving them through that sort of process and those phases that we do with the people within Jindaola. And, they're different places and spaces, but it's a way in which we can apply these knowledges to a particular place and space. So we're just generating this at the moment, just moving into this space. And even just in that enactment, we've begun to get a lot of interest within industry and our local region. So at this point in time, we've been approached by industry to look at the ways in which our relational frameworks and those Aboriginal knowledge exchange spaces and places can be regenerative for our sites. So there's a particular creek, Allen's Creek, and for us, the creeks within our region are quite significant. They're the connectedness for us between the mountains and the sea. So they're old pathways. We've got a yarn, we call it merry-gong, and it's the way in which our people would move between the mountains and the seas across our seasons. And so what we've got here is a particular creek that has been affected quite detrimentally through contamination, and industry is starting to hear and understand the ways in which we're working around these place-based approaches to identifying our relationships with country, and then thereafter how these engagements and activities can work towards the rehabilitation and the regeneration of these places and spaces. So this one here you'll see is not named as yet. We've got to spend some time in that particular place, but this is a project that we're looking to undertake early into the next year with a broader extended number of people, so industry, local residents, other interest groups, trying to find those ways in which we can follow that pathway that we presented to you guys earlier. So for me, working with country and for country, it's about building an intimate and interconnected relationship with country. And what we're wanting to share today is that the work that we're doing and the ways in which we're starting to move outside of the institutional space can be really contributionary to other countries. For us, building any relationship means that we need to have a holistic understanding of our place. And so as we start going through the ways of Jindaola, one of the most significant aspects of that is that you're mapping your landscape. And you're mapping that in a blackfella way. And so for us, what that means is really identifying, if I lean back on some of the small concepts that I shared with you fellas earlier, when we talk about country, we're really trying to map out our physical landscape. When we're talking about kinship, we're trying to then layer our physical landscape with those significant relationships, those interpersonal relationships, and finding ways of giving agency and even sovereignty in some regard to country, to the animals of our country, to, the waterways, to the skyscape, those sorts of things. So really building a holistic comprehension of our landscape. And then as we start to move through that space, we're trying to find a way. And from an Aboriginal perspective, your way is inclusive of philosophy, it's inclusive of customs, it's inclusive of values. So how do we start to negotiate this space collectively, again, knowing that country has agency, that country speaks. And for us as blackfellas, we sort of say in this country, like we walk and we talk. This is that exchange. This is when you know your country and you know your way, but you walk and you talk, and it's that practice phase. So this walking your way and talking your way, they sort of go hand in hand, but it's how do we get from place to place in that healing way? How do we keep that story moving? How do we get to a place where we can share our story with those that we know and those that we don't know, so that we can say, here, this is where we won and this is where we lost and this is the best way forward. Don't walk over there, there's potholes. Walk over this way. Don't walk that way, there's big hills. This one's easier. And so it's becoming more intimately related with your landscape, which, as I'm trying to articulate, is more than just the place on the ground. It's inclusive of all of the interrelationships that sit with that. So for me, just wanted to have an opportunity to quickly share. Yes, we've had a program that's gathered an amazing amount of success, and we're really super proud. And for us, we're just in that phase where we're starting to move this outside of the institution and engage with our broader community around particular places and spaces, and keeping country as the grounding for the ways in which we're engaging. So we're trying to present a philosophical approach that's grounded in an Aboriginal way, so that we can start to collectively find solutions for the issues that are presenting themselves to us today. Thank you.
And thank you, Jade. We've got time for some questions. One that's come in already, and I guess it's turning the micro into the macro. How do you see Jindaola fitting into the co-design process of the hubs across the country? And as we have already heard, from six hubs, six very different stories. But is there an overarching principle, Jade, in terms of applying the work you've been doing to wherever it happens to be, whether it's up in tropical North Queensland or over in the wheat belt of WA, do you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, brother. You've got a situation where it requires engagement with local communities and local knowledge holders of their landscape. And, with no disrespect, that doesn't necessarily have to be Aboriginal people. There's a lot of people that have an intimate relationship and understanding of their landscapes. And this is an opportunity to be engaging all peoples around their intimate understandings of particular landscapes, and being able to share and engage and increase that knowing, so that then you can start to identify a way to move through that space and place collectively. So it's a place-based model. It's not grounded particularly in any place. It's a philosophical approach that just requires the people that have the intimate knowledges of places and spaces to be engaged, to be contributing, and then that facilitation around the way in which that conversation and knowledge moves, that integrity is bound to that particular place. So yeah, it can be adapted, my bro. It's just a way, it's time in some instances, you got to make sure that the right people's at the table, the right place, walk them countries. You've got to know them countries, and then you've got to be able to collectively identify the ways in which you're going to walk that country.
And I wonder if I could ask you, either Pascal or yourself, Jade, about the particular of Lake Illawarra and Allens Creek. And again, in full transparency, I worked at Win 4 as it was from 88 to 94, and know only too well how notorious Allens Creek was and is, and Lake Illawarra has had a transformation. What word I heard from you, Jade, in your presentation was how local industry, and it's worth remembering, people around the country, this region, the Illawarra, is heavy industry, steelworks, fabrication plants, and all the rest of it. And seeing that industry came to the table, that's a bit different, isn't it? How did you get them there?
I don't know if you want to respond to this there, Pascal, or what? Look, they approached us. We work very closely with the Lands Council within this particular region, and we also have a lot of strong relationships with the Aboriginal communities that spread up and down the coast. I think, Jindaola's been able to speak for itself. Hard to talk like that at times, but the work that we's doing does have strong influence over the way in which our community's been engaged. And when our Aboriginal community is engaged and we have particular situations within our context where, sites are being impacted by industry activity. We have a lot of Aboriginal sites that have been part of hot topics within the region of late. It's allowed us at least a conversation with these organisations and these particular industries. There is a bit of a shift in the change, I think, nationally, around the ways in which we can engage with Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal knowledges and the way in which they can be informing our practices. So for us, they've been engaging us and they've shown a deep willingness to be involved. And like I said, it's a big development because it requires time and it requires slow time, and that way is not something you can rush. So yeah, all kudos to them mobs that have been reaching out and engaging with us.
If I just may, one word, yeah. I think Jade is a very humble man, but all this could have happened without his fantastic input, and it's bringing a situation where you could have a conflict, the us versus them, and what Jindaola program is, and the philosophy behind it, which I think Jade articulated very well, is bringing these two domains with bounded knowledge together. And for me, as I wrote in the chat, I've heard Jade many times doing this presentation on the equivalent one, and each time I've got goosebumps, and it leaves me with literally a big smile on my face because I'm coming from system engineering, complex systems, and he puts in practical words, in very simple approach, things that we've been overthinking probably. So again, big thank you to Jade.
And a thank you to you, Pascal, and a thank you to you, Jade. Thank you for allowing us to come and sit with you in the last little while. And all the best with Allens Creek. You'll need it. But lovely to hear from you, and thank you for your time at this forum. Lunch is on the horizon, not quite there yet, but we've got a couple of really great presentations to get us up to lunchtime. We're now going as far away, basically, from from Wollongong, from the Illawarra, as we could possibly get. We're going back to WA. We're going to a remote property about 300 k's east of Geraldton, and it's Challa Station. Debbie and Ashley Dowden are there, and the Dowden family, have been farming there. It's 200,000 acres, and they've been focusing of late on drought resilience and sustainability. They've been putting these things into practice on a family farm that's been there for, give or take 150 years. And they've invited us to join them on this virtual tour.
Ashley and Debbie Dowden, and we run Challa Station near Mount Magnet in WA. You can call us the Droughtmasters. Challa Station is situated in the arid inland region of the southern rangelands, which is the toughest place in Australia to farm. They say that the good thing about living here is that anything you do afterwards is easy. This is arid shrubland country with an annual rainfall of just 220 millimetres. For the last 20 years, we've seen a big change in the rainfall patterns, with spasmodic summer rainfall events now dominating over previously more reliable winter rains. Climate resilience and sustainability have always been the long-term focus of this 200,000 hectare property, and with such unpredictable rainfall patterns, we've learnt to do starvation really well. Fraught with many challenges in an unforgiving landscape, particularly in the last 50 years, the family business has nevertheless continued to grow and expand. Since 1888, the Dowden family have been continually adapting their business practices in response to markets, climate change, cutting-edge research and innovation. Now I can see you asking yourselves, how do they do it? Well, mostly it's down to plain hard work, but we do have 5 pillars of climate resilience that we can share with you. Livestock selection and management, maximising rainfall capture, diversification on or off property, a long-term vision, and carbon capture.
Nothing can replace the expertise of the pastoralist on their own land.
We understand and can read the country. We live full-time on Challa and are out and about on the station most days, constantly assessing the condition of the cattle and the feed on offer. We're planning to start using satellite tracking ear tags to monitor our cattle's movements. This will complement the satellite water monitoring systems already in place. We use self-herding techniques to ensure the property is grazed as evenly as possible, and we believe that regenerating the land with the assistance of mouths and hooves is more effective than leaving the land destocked. Building trap yards is an important priority. These will ensure that the cattle are managed quickly and efficiently using minimal labour input and allowing a reduction in cattle numbers as soon as necessary when food on offer is decreasing. Cattle are managed using low-stress stock handling techniques, and we implement a 2-week intensive training program for all of our future breeding animals. Santa Gertrudis bulls have been specifically selected to cover our herd, and we believe they will be the best fit for our environment. They have enough Bos indicus in them to withstand the harsh environmental conditions and are soft enough to be sold into the southern local West Australian market as well as the live export market.
It does rain at Challa from time to time, but with the way the climate has changed, we can't look forward to winter rain like we used to. Most of our rain now falls in summer as a result of thunderstorms or the odd cyclone that makes its way inland. In this low rainfall landscape, every drop of rain counts. We can't increase the amount of rainfall we get, but we can do our best to control what happens when it hits the ground. We work to maximise rainfall capture and minimise the erosion that can happen during these big rainfall events. In our region, somebody driving down a road when the ground is damp can leave impressions. When it rains, water can run into these impressions and over time they create erosion. Our major focus at the moment is repairing the historical erosion on our roads and spreading water back across the landscape. I'll let Ashley explain how he does that.
All right, this bank that I'm standing on top of here, which you'll see in a minute, is one of the major check banks. It's a watercourse that runs from that direction to this direction. And what's been in the past, if you pan this way, is we've had some gullying. This is right at the head of the gullies here, so the watercourse is behind you. And looking down that way, there was some severe erosion, gully heads, which, as you can see, have been scrub packed. When we put the bank in, we scrub packed. If you pan out to the right, what we've done here is take the water from these gully heads and disperse the water. Probably the watercourse is another 150 metres straight off the end of the bank wide, and it's protecting these gully heads. What we've got here is a woe boy. Now, we installed these probably 12 to 18 months ago with the assistance of Cole Stanton, and there's a series of woe boys down this road. This road historically has been particularly bad. It's been a creek and just getting worse and worse and worse. Now, what we've got is the water flow coming in from my left over here at about 45 degrees, and you can actually see the watercourse is still trickling. You can see the water on the ground swimming along, and it crosses out at 45 degrees to the road and ends up going out. If you pan back to me, and the water flow is flowing that direction out there. So at 45 to the road. So it's been coming onto the road and running down the road and droughting all this country to the right. Now, with this series of woe boys, what we've done now is been managed to get most of the water off the road. This one hasn't been breached at all. A couple of these smaller ones that did flow over the top, but this one here is working really well. So
You can see from the air now how effective these check banks and woe boys are. The big check bank in front of us at the moment needs a little bit more work on the right to stop that water spilling off the edge, but it's doing a pretty good job. And then we can see the woe boys on the left-hand side of the picture and down that road, and you can see how effective they are at getting the water off the road and spreading it back along the landscape. A few weeks later, you can see just how effective those check banks and woe boys have been. They slowed the water when it rained and encouraged it to soak into the ground to increase the moisture infiltration into the soil profile. This enables the growth of more vegetation, which helps to bind the soil, reduce and repair erosion, rebuild soil carbon and maximise the capture of moisture in the infrequent rain events. This creates a compounding beneficial effect and ultimately a healthier landscape. And in the long term, a healthy landscape allows us to maximise production from our cattle.
Diversification has always been a big part of what we do here at Challa Station. It's made us a lot more climate resilient and given us the ability to earn an income in times of severe drought or hardship. It's allowed us to be able to destock our cattle numbers or our stock numbers and still earn a reasonable income and thus not impacting on the environment. The diversification that we chose was to go into earth moving, so we've got a reasonable grader here, 14-foot grader, 950 cat loader, there's a little higher truck there, and we've got a couple of prime movers out here that we use for pulling water carts or tippers, and we chose to go into contracting either road building, road maintenance, road construction and mine contracting work, and that's allowed us to have a steady income stream in times when we have not been able to earn an income off the land. We've also diversified into aerial mustering, and over the years we've mustered right through the southern half of Western Australia's pastoral areas and derived an income from the aerial mustering contract work as well.
So far we've looked at 3 pillars of climate resilience: livestock selection and management, maximising rainfall capture and diversification. Our 4th pillar of climate resilience is to have a long-term vision. Environmental sustainability is underpinned by financial sustainability. You can't be green when you're in the red. Climate resilience requires a long-term vision, and work in the office is just as important as the work done outdoors. A station's a great place to live, but to be sustainable, a station needs to be more than just a lifestyle property. It needs to be operating as a vibrant business with multiple income streams, a long-term plan, and the ability to read and respond to market demands. We keep an eye on the future as we work our way towards it, and we're ready to adapt our business when the need arises. Careful budgeting has long been the cornerstone of the success of the business. In tough times, we've had to be able to run the station on next to nothing. We repair and recycle when we can, and we put money aside for the dry times. Decades of operating in a boom-bust cycle has taught us to maintain reserves and carefully plan expenditure.
We are part of the agricultural sector that is transforming practices to reduce carbon footprints. We are increasing our vegetation cover on the station through our human-induced regeneration carbon project. Although pastoralists don't clear the land, our grazing stock can have an effect on the native vegetation. We use self-herding and other techniques to ensure that cattle don't browse on the regrowing trees, and so the native forests are able to regenerate naturally. Having an HIR carbon project allows us to run our station at just half of its carrying capacity and to sell the excess carbon credits. Lightly stocking the station makes us more climate resilient because we're able to spread cattle over more country during dry times, and the cattle can find enough to eat. Our cattle help to increase soil microbiology and carbon by grazing the vegetation and spreading manure. We are investigating innovative ways of using the cattle to spread microbes throughout the soil. And when you have 500,000 acres of soil, it's good to get a bit of help. New data is emerging that suggests that cattle grazing on the native vegetation in the southern rangelands emit much less methane than cattle in higher input production systems. We recognise that the carbon footprint of the agricultural industry will be coming under more and more scrutiny by markets and financiers. Sourcing sustainable produce is becoming a focus for many international food giants, and as more research is carried out in our region, we are confident that we can prove that we're able to meet these emerging market demands without making any more major changes to our business. We will be scaling up our soil conservation efforts and fine-tuning our livestock management so that we become a meaningful contributor to mitigating climate change.
And lovely to get out and about. Thanks for that tour, Debbie and Ashley and the rest of the crew there. hundreds of kilometres east of Geraldton. I think the quote that jumped out to me there from Debbie was, "You can't be green if you're in the red." The practicality of farm life. Well, now we're going to be joined by the CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology and Deloitte's Tush Tomatsu, because we're going to talk about a tool that is going to bring us more understanding about the climate and drought risk, and a tool that can be used by individual farmers. Graham Bonnett will join us again from CSIRO. We're going to have Sean and Chi-Woo from Deloitte, but first we go to Anthony to kick us off on this final presentation of this morning session. Over to you, Anthony.
Good morning. It'd be nice to have our first slide if possible, but I'll start speaking. I'm Anthony Swirepek from the Department of Ag, Water and the Environment, and I'm, leading with CSIRO, Bureau and Deloitte the build of a couple of pretty interesting tools which we hope will help increase drought and climate resilience. Starting with the Climate Service for Agriculture, if we can move to the second slide, please. We started building the Climate Service, if you think about the blue bar at the bottom, to be modular and include, at its core, climate impact information. So first of all, you need the climate variables. We then need to understand how those climate variables can impact upon your agricultural productivity or your natural capital first. How does the farming system really work with climate is the key thing for us. But we're also hoping as we move along to build in thinking and good information around social resilience, sort of the business planning processes, future markets where they might go in a changing climate as well. So that's the nature of the Climate Service. For the Drought Resilience Self-Assessment Tool, it's really that window in on how do I take that slightly more generic information, and the information we'll provide through the service is going to be cut up at 5 kilometre resolution. But how can you bring your own information to the game through the Resilience Assessment Tool to give a farm level assessment of your resilience? And of course, that the Dr. SAT is only one output of the Climate Service, let's say. We think ourselves as targeting a lot of other users across all sectors of the economy who might be interested in agriculture as well. So multiple approaches there to deliver information to users. We're co-designing the information with users. Now, what you'll hear in these two presentations today is from the Dr. SAT perspective, we're standing up a conceptual wireframe prototype that we're here to test with users over the next 6 months while we develop up the actual assessment tools. So we really want to get good information before we do the build because it's a pretty complex task and we need your input. From the Climate Service perspective, we're starting with some really established national climate projections and historic climate observations data. We're standing that up in a platform, and then our plan is to work with users in our pilot regions to build applications around that climate data, particularly on the impacts of climate on the major commodities in all of our pilot regions. And I'll leave it there and hand over to Chi, who's going to lead off from there. So next slide, please.
Thanks, Anthony. And Anthony mentioned user co-design, and I think this is what I want to emphasize before Sean gets into demoing or talking through the prototype with you. Over the last few months, since about February, we've been engaging with a lot of stakeholders, both in the farming community, as well as the experts and advisors that work with the farmers. And this slide just gives you a sense of one of the channels that we use to engage with farmers. So this is a national survey that has been online on the FDF website for some time. And it just gives you a sense of, the geographical spread of the 144 farmers and then their advisors that we engaged with, as well as the commodities, the farming activities that they're involved with. And it's good to see that we do have good representation from each of the 4 pilot regions. We also have good representation from the two commodities that we will be incorporating into the first release of Dr. SAT. And in terms of the demographics, largely we're talking about farmers that are between 40 and 60 years old. They've been in the farming industry or in farming for 20 plus years. They are, as I said, spread quite broadly across all the regions that I mentioned. In terms of the experts that we touched on, this is really important. The tool that you're about to see has been co-created to a large extent with experts as well. And these are experts not just in the natural capital space, but also in personal well-being and financial capital spaces too. So they include extension officers, the rural financial counseling services, experts that have been involved in personal well-being surveys from the University of Canberra, and also ag-tech experts and of the like, folks like in the ag-tech sector. Next slide, please. So before I hand over to Sean, a few things to note. What you're about to see is not the prototype itself that will be launched tomorrow. These are screen grabs from the prototype, so it won't be as dynamic as what the user will see. And the second thing I want to say is that there has been a lot of thinking around privacy. And the intent is that the user will be entirely in control of the data that he or she decides to share with the tool. And Sean will hopefully talk through some of those options as he goes along with the demo. So over to you, Sean, to showcase this.
Great. Thanks, Chief. So hi, everyone. Sean McClowry. I'm a partner in Deloitte. I'm responsible for the technical build of the Dr. Sat tool. So as Chief said, this is kind of the intro to the landing page of the Dr. Sat tool. And I guess the first point here is when users get access to the tool, the first thing that they'll do is actually select where their farm is. So they'll define where the property is, areas of interest in their primary commodity, and they'll create their profile. They'll have, as Chi said, full control of their information and how it's used within the tool. If you go to the next slide, what I'm going to start to do is just quickly walk us through the elements of Dr. Sat. So there's four main components to Dr. Sat. So the first thing is what we call bird's eye view. So this is actually using remote sensing information to actually get an operational view of a farmer's land, right? And one of the things that we really learned is this operational view is really important for resilience and to actually be able to measure things appropriately. So this was actually an aspect of design, and I'll go to that next, that will actually evolved through the process of consultation with farmers. The resilience assessment, so this is an assessment where we ask farmers a number of questions around the dimensions of environmental, financial, and personal and social resilience. And then we provide insights around actually that are personalized as a response to those questions. We get into the impacts of climate change longer term and what that's going to be for resilience. And this is where our key interface is to Graham and the CSA team. And so we'll actually we'll talk in the handover around kind of how we intersect as well. And then finally is the adaptation pathway. So we actually don't want to just tell people around how resilient they are. We want to help them be more resilient. And so we actually give people actually pathways that they can follow as part of that approach and create feedback loops to becoming more resilient. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll just take you through bird's eye view first, right? So this view here, I've actually gone and I've drawn out where my farm is. And we're going to use satellite information to be able to give them dimensions like what is my level of ground cover, levels of soil moisture, dam levels, waterways, and then evolving over time to areas like biodiversity and carbon that's captured. They'll be able to actually look at different points in time, so where things sit now versus a point in time in the past, and actually see how they compare regionally over time. We will also use advanced machine learning technology to actually create observations around what's happening. So if you look really closely on that screen there, those numbers are actually where we're going to create these observations that say, hey, look, your ground cover has increased in this area, or it's decreased over time compared to an equivalent point in a season in the past. And so this capability actually, as I said, we didn't actually start here. This was something from talking with people, they said that this would be really useful. We expect this to continue to evolve and get more and more advanced as we launch the tool, and it's really an area that we can build out to be quite sophisticated. If you go to the next slide, Annabelle. Great. So here's the resilience assessment, and so the first thing I want to call out is there's the three dimensions to it, right? So there's the environmental, the financial, and the personal and well-being areas. So the three dimensions. It's also modularized, and so if you look at those different kind of, let's call modules, right? So areas like pasture quality, water use, stock quality, users will be able to take individual assessments on each of those areas. So they're not going to need to do a giant assessment all at once. They can if they want, but they can actually go and do it quite individually as well. And we'll continue to add modules over time. If you go to the next screen, I'll just take you into an assessment, right? So this is an example here. The previous step, what a user would have done is actually they would have described what their land was like. We'll then show them imagery that will say, can you describe your land condition, right? So you've said that, I've got a land type of black basalt. We know the time of year it is because we've actually chosen that kind of information earlier. They're going to get then a personalized view of different photos they can select from that describes their land. And if you then go to the next question, so if you click ahead. Just taking through another question, right? So we're going to continue to ask them assessment type questions. They're simple to answer, right? They're quite straightforward, but we're going to build up a knowledge base of information around the farmer's land and actually their picture of resilience. And so if you go to the next slide. So we'll take the farmer through a series of questions, and ultimately what we'll get to is an assessment report, right? And so this is going to show them for the area of pasture quality, where they sit on the scale of resilience, from resilient to, in this case, they're in a vulnerable state. And so what we'll then be doing is actually, from a number of conditions that we've measured against, providing them with personalized insights around what they can do. And this is really the important part, is you've assessed me where I'm at, what can I actually do about it, right? And so these insights actually give quite specific recommendations based on the assessment, but the pathways are ultimately what lead them to what they need to do. So if you actually click to the next slide here. So think of the pathways as a number of choices of what they can do as part of the approach, and then they set specific goals, right? It's kind of like improving your health. You might actually have an overall set of things that you find out about, and then these are the things that I want to kind of set goals for. So I can set my goal is to improve ground cover management in this particular state. So I would set actually goals around where I want to get to. I would have a time dimension to it. I could set where I want to see different notifications. And Dr. Set will provide you, the users, with a set of activities that they should go through. It'll point people to information resources, events that they can attend, people that they might want to connect to for more information, and they'll be able to track effectiveness on this over time. So if we just flip to the next slide, please. So I'm going to hand back over to Chi to talk about the climate section. And so, yeah, I appreciate it was a really quick run through, but hopefully that was helpful around you understanding aspects of Dr. Set.
Thanks, Sean. So just remembering that Dr. Set's vision is not just to look at resilience today for the farmer or help the farmer understand resilience today, but to connect that resilience insight with knowledge about what the future climate will do to vulnerability and resilience. So to help that, Dr. Set will be linked to the CSA platform and data, and Graham will be talking about that very soon. And all I want to say is that the intent is that Dr. Set will access information from CSA and other sources of climate futures, both chronic and acute projections of climate change under two scenarios or two emission scenarios, the RCP 8.5 as well as the 2.6 or 4.5. And it would connect the climate projections to changing expectations of what those projections do to productivity of the commodities that the farmer is involved with. And with that knowledge, the farmer is better equipped to understand and plan, as Sean said, to identify the right pathways and in areas of adaptation. So, Graham, and next slide, over to you.
Thank you very much. What we have on the screen here is the landing page for the Climate Services for Agriculture prototype. In this prototype, for the first time, changes in both the historical weather experienced by people can be viewed alongside the predicted trajectories of future climate at a local level relevant to individual producers and their advisors. This will allow farmers to see if and how their climate has already changed and what the trajectories for the future are. And then in subsequent releases, as Anthony said, we'll build out more information about what these changes mean and some options that for people to consider how they might adapt to them to remain viable and sustainable into the future. So working in the pilot regions, we'll revisit this prototype and co-design the details of the additional information needs and how it is to be presented. So in the next slide, I'll demonstrate the prototype by using a location. I've chosen to put in the town name Katanning, but you can also put in an address. When you do that, you're then taken to this generic dashboard where I can see that my average annual rainfall between 1961 and 1990, and then on the next slide, I can compare that to the current era of 1991 to 2000. Can we have the next slide, please? And we can see that the decrease in rainfall there shows that at a local level, the generalisation about the reduction in rainfall for the southwest of Western Australia applies. So we can take the generalisation down to these 5 kilometre grids. I can also see in the next slide that the likely trajectory is that this decrease will continue over the next decade. On the next slide, I can also see that my annual heat risk, here measured as days over 35 degrees, has increased, and that the number of frost risk days has decreased, and both these trends are likely to continue into the future. However, because in this area, one of the things I grow is wheat, I'm interested to see how this will affect my wheat crop. So I can see this on the next slide on the wheat commodity tab. And if I go to the next slide, I can see that that decreased annual rainfall between the historic and the current period is translated to a decrease of about 30 millimetres of rain in the growing season. So I'm much more interested in the growing season rainfall than the annual rainfall. You can see that there's been no increase in rain during the fallow period. And so in combination, this means that this reduced in-season rainfall equates to a reduction of about half a tonne of potential yield. However, as Tanya showed this morning, recent studies have shown that despite these decreases in growing season rainfall, the adoption of the new technologies that she described have meant actual yields have been maintained. So the question then becomes, will this trend continue in the future? In the next slide, we can see that this is a likely further decrease in growing season rainfall. So in the subsequent release of the service, we'll need to build out those sections that we talked about earlier on about what the consequences of this further drop in potential yield is and what some of the adaptation pathways might be. On the next slide, we can see that the days over 35 degrees here now are shown during the reproductive stages of the crop are predicted to be highly likely to increase into the future. The frost risk, however, is experienced much earlier in the season and so is less of a risk during the sensitive grain formation and filling stages of the crop. On the next slide, as I grow other grains such as canola and run sheep in my enterprise, I will look forward to the information relevant to these commodities being built out in the platform over the coming year and how this in combination affects my enterprise. So we know from some initial feedback that more current weather information needs to be built into the platform, and seasonal forecasts, the bridge between the past and the future climate, will be incorporated by the end of the year. We know that we have work to do to take people with us on the journey demonstrating the value in the platform and the adoption of it. This is why we'll be working with people to co-design the content and the visual appearance. We have run an information session already for the New England area of the pilot regions, and our engagement will start in other pilot regions in coming weeks. Although initially our engagements are predominantly about co-design, they will then transition to engagement for adoption over the next few years to maximise uptake of the tool. To that end, we'll be working with Dr. SAT, the regional pilots and hubs to present information about impacts and vulnerabilities, and working with other elements of the Future Drought Fund program to help people explore adaptation pathways and potential change to reach the goal of increased resilience. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much. It's certainly a brave new world, and a brave new world which can offer a very powerful tool potentially for building resilience to drought. We've got some questions coming in. Now, there are 4 of you here. The questions that have come in have not been addressed to anyone specifically. So if I can leave it to the quartet there to jump in with the person who feels best qualified to answer. Here's our first question. How can the DRSAT, the Drought Resistant Self-Assessment Tool, be scaled up from individual engagement and resilience building to community level, to build connections and share lessons learned at a larger scale? And if I can add to that, is that part of your thinking in the medium long term? So how can the DRSAT tool be scaled up from individual engagement and resilience building to community level? Who's up to answer that one?
That's probably Chi's question.
Chi.
Thanks, Anthony. So yes, Dr. SAT has, the intent of Dr. SAT is to support the farmer, the individual farmer. However, there are 2 things that I think are relevant here. Firstly, the connection between the farmer and the community is well documented in terms of resilience and vulnerability. So we know from the insights that Dr. SAT can generate in terms of data that there will be valuable data that would be valuable to connect with community resilience or community resilience projects. The other thing to note is that Dr. SAT is not just a tool to help the farmer through the self-assessment process that Sean just went through. Subject to privacy agreements being put in place with the farmer in the contracting phase, information that the farmer provides can also be pushed, if you like, to researchers that would find that information, or the information that Dr. SAT can generate and collate at the national level, useful for and accelerate further research into this space about both farmer vulnerability, commodity-related vulnerability, and community-related vulnerability.
Thanks, Chi. We've got another question here from Sandy Delwo. Does the bird's eye view pillar connect to the existing ground cover mapping tools? The GeoGlam Group on Earth Observation, Global Agriculture Monitoring, and the RAP map, RAPP, Rangeland and Pasture Productivity. We have a flurry of acronyms hither and yon. Who's up to answer that one? The bird's eye pillar view connect to existing ground cover mapping tools.
That one's Sean's.
Yeah, I can make a comment on. Yeah, so as I mentioned, when we initially started work, we actually didn't have bird's eye view as part of the scope. So it's actually something that's actually come out of pretty recent discussions and design. We're actually going through the process now of actually assessing what data sets that we'll bring in to establish the bird's eye view. So short answer is actually we're talking and talking to a number of the acronyms that you referred to is, what would be the best sources to bring into the tool. And it's stuff that, we expect to get confirmation on in the coming weeks and months.
Thanks, Sean. A question now from David Post. Looks like you can choose which decade in the future you output climate variables for. What are those choices? Who's up to answer that? Looks like you can choose which decade in the future you output climate variables for. What are those choices? Who's up for that one?
Yeah,
thanks, Graham.
Thanks for the question, David. The future climate trajectories are based around 2030, 2050 and 2070. And so they are all shown within the tool. And on that front page at the moment, yes, I think you can select between those, but there is a view below that will give you all of them side by side as well.
Thanks, Graham. And we've got a question now from Stephen Lade, I think is the pronunciation, L-A-D-E. How do you map and assess adaptation pathways? How do you map and assess adaptation pathways? Whose question is that?
Gee, I think.
Let me see if I can interpret that question. So, how do you map? What the tool is seeking to do is to push to the user relevant ideas, if you like. This is not advice, but ideas of adaptation pathways that through the analytics engine of the tool, Dr. Sat determines to be most relevant to the self-assessment questions or answers provided by the farmer. So the mapping of pathways will be done through that process of connecting with what aspects of the modules are particularly vulnerable from the farmer's perspective. Now, if the question is more about how do we know that the adaptation solutions that are perhaps implemented by the farmer are making a difference, that is the long-term ambition, if you like, of the tool, to be able to engage with the farmer, to access information, to then be able to track the efficacy of any of the ideas provided by Dr. Sat. I'm not sure whether that was the angle as well.
Thanks, Chi. We've got time for one more question, and Elizabeth Coonan has sort of gazumped me because I was going to ask something along these lines as well. To what extent is local, Indigenous, on-the-ground and place-based knowledge used to inform the resilience assessment and the strategies in the Dr. Sat? I guess it's that age-old conflict between lived experience and the numbers. And I see Anthony is keen to speak to that one.
Look, at the moment, we've stood up the basic capability to go out and start the user engagement process. And it's very much within our intent to engage Indigenous communities as we go out as part of the process from here, whether it's to work on the analytics that sit inside the Climate Service for Agriculture, or whether it's to tune the drought resilience self-assessment tool. There'll be Indigenous knowledge hopefully brought in. So we're certainly looking for members of the Indigenous community in all our pilot regions to engage with us.
Can I also add just quickly to that? And that is, right from the start, we've also been very conscious of the fact that we don't want this tool to just be curating of scientifically proven solutions to resilience building. We want to incorporate practical insights and knowledge that have been developed by farmers and communities through a multi-generational experience. And so rules of thumb examples are actually hardwired into the tool.
Sounds like that theme of sharing wisdom, telling stories can be applied in a scientific way and most effectively. We end this morning's session, which is now into the afternoon, apart from over in the West, with our most complex in terms of technical challenges, and we got there. Thank you very much, Graham, Chi-Woo, Sean, and Anthony. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Well, it's been quite a morning, and I think we all deserve a lunch break or a brunch break if you're in the West. We will be back at noon Western, 1:30 Central, and 2:00 Eastern for our keynote panel discussion with 3 people who'll be bringing some very strong ideas to the table, and we're looking for your input as well. A lot of the discussion this morning has been leading to this panel discussion. I'll be asking as many questions as I can on your behalf in that panel, which starts in around about 57 minutes time. So I won't dilly or dally anymore, and I wish you a good brunch hour, and see you again in just under an hour. Thank you.